Luffy is not who you think he is. The contrarian cold open. Luffy is a lie, which is quite problematic because the premise of this entire fandom is, we know Luffy. He's simple, stretchy freedom boy. And now we kind of have to tell you that the Luffy you know is actually version 3 of a long-running science experiment in Oda's brain. If Romance Dawn Luffy #1 sailed into canon tomorrow, you would call him an isekai imposter and make a 10-minute fake Luffy exposed short about him. People like to say, Luffy is the easiest shonen protagonist to understand. To which I say, sure, if you ignore the 2 previous main characters named Monkey D. Luffy that Oda literally built and then quietly buried. Because as far as early drafts go, this guy is a vague mess of alternate backstories, different morality sliders, and a completely different relationship to Shanks and the whole Pirate King idea. In one version, the hat isn't even Shanks's precious symbol of inherited will. It's just a hat. Emotional damage speedrun. Here's an interesting thing. In the first Romance Dawn one-shot, Grandpa isn't the off-screen trauma machine we know as Garp. He's a whole different flavor of weird old man. Luffy's power is framed more like a cursed artifact than a goofy rubber body. And his attitude toward piracy is way less adventure messiah and way more guy who stumbled into a power system and is rolling with it. You drop that kid into East Blue, and Zoro probably walks off the ship out of sheer confusion. And to be fair, that's exactly why this video exists. We're not doing the usual "remember when Luffy punched a celestial dragon" highlight reel. We're going to live in the gutters of One Piece. The Romance Dawn prototypes, obscure SBS answers about his biology, vivre card notes, databook crumbs, and those old Oda interviews where he casually says stuff like, "Oh yeah, I already drew Luffy's final scene years ago." And everyone just moved on with their day. So the roadmap for the next 3 hours looks like this. First, we dissect the early Luffys, the gun-using draft, the cursed fruit drifter, the version who doesn't even care about being Pirate King in the same way. Then we zoom out into myth and folklore, from Sun Wukong to Nika to Joy Boy, and ask how a simple rubber boy ended up carrying an entire pantheon on his back. After that, we get weirdly biological. How his rubber body and gears quietly break normal devil fruit logic. Why one SBS answer basically admits he survives things that should erase most Logias, and what that says about the series' power system. From there we chase the hidden relationship threads, Luffy's off-panel impact on cover story characters, the side NPCs whose lives he warps just by existing, the subtle vivre card notes that turn background jokes into real connections. And running under all of that is the meta-lore, scrapped endings, Oda's trial and error with Luffy's personality, and what it means that the final Luffy scene is already sitting in a drawer somewhere.
The big contrarian thesis is this: Luffy is not a simple character at all. He's a deliberately engineered illusion of simplicity, sitting at the intersection of decades of drafts, folklore, and long-term narrative planning. I want to emphasize that by the time we're done, "he just wants freedom" is going to feel like saying, "the ocean is wet." So next up, we're going to walk through Romance Dawn version 1, page by page, and you'll see exactly why Oda basically had to kill that Luffy so the real one could set sail. Prototype Pirate, Romance Dawn. Version 1's very different Luffy. So, let's crack open the first corpse. Romance Dawn version 1 is where Oda basically speedran One Piece in a tiny fairy tale bottle, and you can feel him poking at the Luffy idea like, does this thing even walk? This was pre-One Piece, a one-shot in Weekly Shonen Jump, Oda's first serious attempt at the pirate story that would eventually eat the planet. On paper, version 1 Luffy looks familiar. He's already a rubber man, already ate a devil fruit, already knows Shanks, already has the straw hat. If you skim it, you might say, oh, it's just early One Piece, to which I say, no, this is like playing a prototype build where the physics are wrong and the UI is a vague mess. The whole tone is different. The world feels small, almost storybook. One sleepy village, one sky-riding bird, one bandit-type villain.
It's not the sprawling ocean game, it's a self-contained seaside folktale. Here's an interesting thing. This Luffy is weirdly calm. He's not the chaos gremlin who eats a whole restaurant and then punches a world noble. He's quieter, more of a wandering hero archetype. He strolls into the story, helps a girl, deals with a bad guy, and moves on. He still does dumb stuff, but he's not aggressively stupid as a comedic engine. You don't get that this man has 2 brain cells and both are rubber-coated energy. Instead, he occasionally stops and thinks. It's unsettling. His dream matches that vibe. He talks about going to sea, about freedom and adventure, but the phrase "King of the Pirates" doesn't slam down like a world-breaking declaration. It's kind of a soft, personal goal. I want to travel. I want to be free. Cool, relatable, also narratively lower stakes. Because as far as shonen escalation goes, I want to see the world is a very different power system from I will literally claim the throne of all pirates. You can see why Oda later cranked the title up. The bigger dream forces a bigger world. Morally, version 1 Luffy is closer to your classic Jump hero. He steps in because helping is right. Bandits are bad, bullies are bad, protect the innocent, etc. Canon Luffy will absolutely save people, but his axis is more I like you / you're fun / you're free versus abstract justice. I want to emphasize that difference because it's tiny on the page and massive thematically. This Luffy feels like he could slot into any generic adventure manga. Even Shanks is tuned differently. He still gives Luffy the hat, still inspires him, but the relationship reads less mythic and more straightforward mentor figure. The hat is important, sure, but it doesn't yet feel like a holy relic in the Roger, Joy Boy, Nika relay race. It's a promise, not a prophecy. Visually, you can see Oda testing things. Luffy's face is rounder, more cute kid than feral sun god. The stretching is drawn simpler, almost Looney Tunes, and the fights are short, clean gags instead of the later Rube Goldberg choreography. You can practically watch Oda learning what rubber combat can do. And to be fair, this prototype Luffy works. But he's not our Luffy. He's too tidy, too normal, not nearly unhinged enough. Which is probably why Oda went back and said, okay, what if I twist the knobs way harder? Because version 2, that's where the backstory, the hat, and even the tone of the whole world start mutating into something much stranger. Romance Dawn, version 2, the almost canon Luffy that still feels wrong. So version 2 rolls in like, hey, what if we just made One Piece? And to be fair, it's kind of scary how close it gets. This is the so-called near-canon Romance Dawn, the one that ran in Weekly Shonen Jump as a proper pilot and basically functioned as Oda's dress rehearsal for Chapter 1. Same title, same kid with a straw hat, same vague promise of pirates and freedom, but the wiring under the floorboards is still different. Plot-wise, it's simple. Luffy's out at sea. He meets a girl named Anne and her giant bird. There's a marine antagonist doing marine things. And Shanks exists more as a remembered presence than a mythic, world-shaking event. The world already feels more structured than version 1. Marines, towns, wanted posters, a clearer sense of a power system. You can actually see Oda going, okay, this is the sandbox, instead of just throwing rubber at bandits and seeing what sticks. Here's an interesting thing. This Luffy's personality finally starts to sound like the idiot we know. He's louder, more impulsive, much more comedic. He'll just yell his dream at strangers like, yeah, I'm gonna be a great pirate. What about it? The gags land closer to East Blue energy, and he's willing to pick fights for fun. But as far as protagonist vibes go, he still reads a bit too heroic. He's more wandering do-gooder than chaos gremlin. He helps Anne because it's the right thing to do, not just because it intersects with his selfish freedom trip. And that ties into how he states his dream. He wants to be a great pirate, not explicitly the Pirate King. That one missing label sounds tiny, right? To which I say, no, that's the gravitational center of the whole series. Great pirate is a career goal. Pirate King is a myth, a crown, an existential argument with the entire world order.
Shanks' influence is warm nostalgia, not, I lost my arm, my crew, and my presence turns the sea silent. When Oda rewrites this into Canon Chapter 1, he cranks the tragedy and awe to 11, so that the hat stops being a cute accessory and becomes a literal burden of will. I want to emphasize that gap between pretty good hero and unhinged rubber messiah is engineered. Version 2 proves Oda could have kept Luffy as a relatively normal shonen lead, but he consciously dials up the idiocy, the stubbornness, the selfish freedom obsession so this one brain cell pirate can drag an entire world behind him. And if you think that was accidental, wait until we pull out Oda's own comments and metalore receipts on how he built Luffy to last. Oda versus
his own hero. Why Luffy was rewritten from the ground up. Oda basically went to war with his own main character. The guy looked at early Luffy, looked at the lifespan of a weekly manga and said, "Yeah, I'm not drawing this dude for 30 years. And to be fair, that's kind of his whole philosophy. If it's not fun for him, it dies in the draft stage. Here's an interesting thing from his interviews. Oda keeps repeating that realism is optional, but fun is mandatory. He wants a story he can enjoy making every single week, which is why he says the protagonist has to be someone he personally likes hanging out with on the page. Simple, loud motivations on the surface, deeper themes buried underneath. I want to be Pirate King is literally the most basic goal ever. But that's the point. It's a clean engine that can secretly tow ideas about oppression, inherited will, and history without stalling. So when he talks about Luffy's design, he uses phrases like stupidly honest. Luffy blurts out what he wants, doesn't scheme, doesn't angst. Oda has also flat out said he doesn't want romance drama for Luffy because as far as he's concerned, that would hijack the story from adventure into soap opera. Making Luffy almost immune to conventional drama, no love triangle, no am I worthy monologues, keeps the camera pointed at freedom, friendship, and punching God. Compare that to the Romance Dawn prototypes.
those Luffys flirt with a more standard heroic tone, softer goals, more generic I'll help people because I'm nice energy, less extreme stupidity. It reads like a shonen starter pack. You can see why Oda abandoned it. That version would just disappear in a crowd of mid-90s jump leads. Canon Luffy, by contrast, is so exaggerated he feels wrong at first. And that wrongness is exactly what makes him unforgettable. Oda's also said he wanted a pirate who doesn't feel like a villain. Pirates are supposed to be scary. He gives us a smiling, childlike rubber man whose body literally turns slapstick. That goofy design disarms you so completely that he can sneak in slavery, genocide, and institutional rot under a straw hat.
To which I say, that's not an accident. That's smuggling heavy themes past a rating board. But Oda keeps insisting Luffy isn't a conventional good person. He helps people he likes, ignores people he doesn't care about being a hero or a symbol. That nuance is way sharper in canon than in the drafts. Early Luffy flirts with generic kindness. Final Luffy is selfish about freedom first, morality second, which is a much better vehicle for challenging the world government without turning him into a lecture machine. And then there's the ending. Oda has said multiple times he had the final image and message in mind early on. If you already know the last beat is about freedom, the main character's personality can't be vague. He has to be the kind of idiot who would laugh at the execution platform of the world and mean it. Version 1 and 2 Luffy just don't have the spiritual horsepower for that. Canon Luffy's idiot sun god of freedom energy is dialed up so that when we finally hit that ending, it feels inevitable instead of contrived. And speaking of sun gods, Oda was baking in a very specific mythic flavor long before the word Nika ever showed up. The rubber, the drums, the sun motifs, none of that is random. Next, we're diving into the folklore toolkit behind Luffy. The Monkey King, Joy Boy, Nika, and all the weird meta-lore Oda hid in plain sight. From Monkey to Monkey King, Luffy's hidden son. Wukong Dena. So let's start with the obvious crime Oda committed. He made a character literally named Monkey, who stretches his body like a cartoon, and then expected us not to think of the Monkey King. That's not subtext. That's just text with sunglasses on. Sun Wukong, if you've somehow dodged every anime that's ripped him off, is the Monkey King from Journey to the West. He's a rebellious, immortal trickster who breaks heaven's rules, bullies dragons, steals a magic staff, and has to get Buddha to literally sit on him because jail wasn't enough. He shapeshifts, clones himself from his fur, somersaults across the world, and generally treats reality like a suggestion. He is chaos and freedom as a person. Japanese and Chinese pop culture have been farming this archetype for decades. Dragon Ball's Goku is the most famous riff, but he's one of like 100 cheeky monkey hero with a pole characters. So when Oda drops Monkey D. Luffy as our lead, a Japanese reader doesn't need a PhD in folklore to go, "Oh, okay, this is that guy. This is their Wukong." And to be fair, Oda immediately leans into the same energy. Idiot genius, unstoppable will, zero respect for authority. Here's an interesting thing. Wukong's whole body is basically early Toon Force. He stretches, inflates, shrinks, multiplies, and just kind of refuses to die in ways that are played for comedy and horror at the same time. Luffy's Gomu Gomu body is the same basic idea run through a shonen battle filter. Both of them shrug off conventional damage. Both weaponize their own bodies in deeply stupid ways, and both turn getting hit into a punchline. People like to say Luffy is just rubber Goku, to which I say, you're skipping the older monkey in the room. And as far as anti-authority goes, the parallels are loud. Wukong literally storms heaven, beats up celestial officials, and only calms down after divine intervention. Luffy punches a celestial dragon on global TV, declares war on the world government at Eni's lobby, and treats admirals, emperors, and kings like mildly annoying NPCs. Titles do not matter. Ranks do not matter. If you're in the way of his friend's freedom, you're getting stretched. What about the staff? Early on, Luffy runs around with a pole on Dawn Island, and in the Romance Dawn prototypes, swinging it in this super loose improv way. It's not the Ruyi Jingu Bang, but the vibe is similar. A scrappy monkey kid whacking grown men with a stick and laughing. Oda eventually shifts him toward boxing and brawling, and to be fair, that fits the series' evolving power system better. But that early staff echo is very much, yes, I have read Journey to the West. I want to emphasize the sun angle too. Wukong is tied to brightness, to the dawn after oppressive order. Luffy's smile, the sun that never sets speeches, the drums of liberation, and the reveal that his fruit is actually the sun god Nika, all lock him into that same symbolic lane. The idiot light bulb in the middle of the world's darkest room. Oda has talked about loving classic literature and folklore, and even if he's never put Wukong in an SBS, the structure is too neat to be a coincidence. But Sun Wukong is just one layer. Under that, you've got Nika, Joy Boy, and this weird pirate bloodline that runs from Roger to Shanks to Luffy. So next, we're going to stack those myths on top of each other and see what kind of monster protagonist Oda actually built. Nika, Joy Boy, Roger, Shanks. The lineage. Luffy was built to inherit. So when we stack those myths, what do we actually get?
We get the realization that Luffy isn't just kind of like a legendary hero. He is literally a walking crossover event between 4 different in-universe legends, and somehow the story plays that like it's no big deal. To which I say, this is the most low-key, overpowered lore build of any shonen protagonist. Let's start with Nika. The big Wano twist is that Luffy's Gomu Gomu no Mi was never a simple rubber fruit. It's the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika. Human, sun god model. Its power is not stretch, its power is liberation. It turns the user into a figure whose fighting style is cartoon physics weaponized, whose heartbeat literally becomes the drums of liberation, and whose job is to make people smile while punching tyrants into the horizon. That's not a combat ability, that's a thesis statement. Here's an interesting thing. The moment Luffy awakens Nika, the narrative immediately drags Joy Boy into the room. Zunisha hears the heartbeat and goes, "Joy Boy has returned." Joy Boy was the guy who made a promise to the world and failed to cash the check. Ancient laughter, ancient drums, a failed liberation attempt. So when Luffy starts laughing in the face of death on the rooftop and the drums kick in, it's framed as the remix of a song the world hasn't heard in 800 years. Not reincarnation, but a sequel track. Then we echo that forward to Roger. Roger reaches Laugh Tale, reads the whole script, and laughs at the supposed end of the world.
Luffy hasn't been there yet, but we already know he laughs at the impossible. He sparks a new pirate era. He's another D, and he inspires people just by existing. Oda has said Luffy is not Roger reborn, and to be fair, their vibes are different. But the narrative keeps putting Luffy in Roger-shaped spaces. Same hat silhouette, same execution platform energy, same I bet on the next era speech patterns. Shanks is the bridge piece in this weird inheritance system. He literally carries Roger's will, his ship, his crew's ethos, then hands the hat and the dream to Luffy. Years later, he's the guy guarding the Gomu Gomu fruit, getting his arm chomped off to bet on Luffy's future. Did he fully know it was Nika? Maybe, maybe not. But as far as narrative symbolism goes, he's the courier delivering the myth. I want to emphasize how stupidly simple Luffy's stated goal is. I want to be free. That's it. But that one idea is the common denominator between Nika's liberation, Joy Boy's promise, Roger's free-spirited journey, and Shanks' gamble on the next generation. The world keeps quietly calling Luffy the man we've been waiting for, without ever slapping a chosen one sticker on his forehead, because he keeps choosing that freedom every single time. Destiny versus free will is the tightrope Oda's walking. Luffy inherits all these wills not because a prophecy demanded it, but because he's too stubborn to be anyone except himself.
And if you're going to turn a guy into the convergence point of gods, kings, and pirate legends, his body and powers kind of have to be built for that, which is where the weird SBS biology, rubber organs, and how does this idiot survive anything? Science experiment, that is Luffy's body, comes crashing in next. Rubber Logic 101, how Luffy's body actually works, according to Oda. So let's actually open up the secret rulebook Oda keeps under his desk, labeled, "How is this man not dead yet?" Because the second you say his whole body is rubber, you've basically invited every physics major and bathroom joker in Japan to write into the SBS.
Oda's been dealing with this for decades, and his responses live in that beautiful middle ground between fake science and, to which I say, shut up, it's funny. Here's an interesting thing he's clarified early on. Luffy isn't just skin-deep rubber. The organs, the blood vessels, the muscles, all of it is rubberized. That's why blunt force normally just bounces off or deforms him. But a sword, a bullet, or anything that causes clean penetration still absolutely wrecks him. Rubber doesn't magically stop knives, and to be fair, it would be kind of boring if it did. The big showcase of Oda thought ahead is the lightning immunity. Enel's whole god complex literally collapses because rubber is an insulator.
Fans assumed this was a retroactive excuse, to which I say, Oda went into Skypiea with that punchline locked and loaded. In SBS, he straight up confirms that Luffy versus Lightning was planned, and that the Goro Goro no Mi would have been absurdly overpowered without this one doofus whose body is basically industrial safety gear. But rubber doesn't save him from everything. People love to argue, shouldn't he be immune to heat and cold? Because as far as cartoon logic goes, stretchy equals invincible. Oda's like, no. Gear 2 literally overheats his blood. Punk Hazard has him freezing, teeth chattering. Akainu's magma burns him badly. In Q and As, Oda has said the rubber body changes how damage looks, not whether extreme temperatures can hurt.
He's not a car tire. He's a guy whose flesh behaves like a car tire until it doesn't. Same thing with blood and poison. If he were fully synthetic, Magellan's poison in Impel Down shouldn't work, but it almost kills him. On Fishman Island, he needs a blood transfusion, which only makes sense if his blood is still, blood. I want to emphasize this. Oda consistently treats Luffy as biologically organic, just with rubber properties layered on, which is why Chopper can still be a doctor and not a mechanic. And he's not infinitely stretchy either. Oda's said overstretching can injure him. Certain moves strain ligaments, which sets the stage for the gears literally shaving years off his life. The body horror is baked into the elastic gag. Then you get the truly cursed SBS questions. Can he inflate specific body parts? How does a rubber guy use the bathroom? Does his stomach digest differently? Oda will half-joke answers like, yes, probably, or imply his rubber guts process food in unique ways. Because as far as he's concerned, if it makes a gag work, it's canon enough. And all of these half-serious rules are about to get stress-tested, because the gears are basically Oda asking, what if this cartoon anatomy was a horror movie power system? That's where we're going next. Gears 2 to 4, the body horror comedy of Luffy's self-modification. So, the gears are what happens when a shonen protagonist looks at his own internal organs and goes, what if this was a DIY upgrade kit? No magic sword, no sacred training arc waterfall, just Luffy deciding that OSHA regulations are for cowards and turning his body into a homebrew power system. Gear 2 is the most "this should kill you" of the bunch. Oda explains in an SBS that Luffy uses his rubber veins like high-pressure tubes, pumping his blood faster to circulate oxygen and nutrients. In real life, your cardiologist would log off the series at that sentence, to which I say, welcome to cartoon biology.
Luffy literally supercharges his circulation. His muscles get more fuel, and suddenly he's a blur kicking CP9 agents like he's unlocked the speed stat menu. But here's an interesting thing. Oda doesn't treat it as free power. He said that forcing your heart and blood to work like that will shorten Luffy's lifespan. We see the immediate side effects too. Overheating, steam pouring off him, that drained, wobbling collapse after Eni's lobby. It's the visual language of a guy burning his candle at both ends because his friends are on the line. I want to emphasize how on-brand that is. Luffy's whole personality is future me can deal with it, and Gear 2 is literally that as a combat style. Gear 3 takes the same idea and goes, what if we made it funnier and way more cursed? Instead of blood, he blows air into his bones, not his muscles, his bones. He inflates his arm from the inside, weaponizing his skeleton into a giant hammer. Oda explains that when the air exits, Luffy's body rebalances, which is why he shrinks into that tiny chibi form. It's body horror with a Looney Tunes cool-down animation. And, to be fair, Gear 3 is kind of the escalation point for how far he's willing to deform himself. He's not just stretching anymore. He's casually rearranging his internal structure for more power. Broken ribs? Luffy's over here using expandable femurs as siege weapons. The gag of him becoming Mini Luffy after a massive attack sells it as comedy. But underneath that, you're watching a guy treat his own skeleton like a balloon animal. Then Gear 4 shows up and says, why not all of the above plus hockey? Boundman, Tankman, Snakeman. Each is Luffy combining Gear 2's accelerated blood flow, Gear 3's inflation tricks, and armament hockey to compress and spring-load his rubber body. He's a living cannon, a bouncy castle of violence. The databooks and Oda's comments flag the cost. Brutal stamina drain, a forced cooldown where he literally can't use hockey and just flops around, and that terrifying vulnerability window on Dressrosa, where Doflamingo is hunting him like a wounded animal.
People sometimes ask if Oda planned all this perfectly from the start, because as far as internal logic goes, it's a vague mess that somehow works. And yet, all of this still sat under the Gomu Gomu no Mi lie. Once Nika enters the chat, the logic of these gears flips. Gear 5 turns the body horror into full-on toon horror, and the series quietly admits Luffy's biology was never just rubber at all. We'll start poking that open next. Immunity, weakness, and the weird edge cases of Rubber Luffy. So if Luffy's biology was never just rubber, does that mean he's basically invincible now? That's the casual fan take. Cartoon body, god fruit, plot armor set to max. To which I say, only if you ignore the long, weird history of Oda quietly bonking him with very specific kryptonites whenever things get too silly. On paper, Rubber Luffy shrugs off blunt force. You can punch, kick, or slam him through a building, and he'll just kind of wobble. But Oda builds in a whole checklist of exceptions. Sharp and piercing attacks? Those absolutely work. Buggy literally cuts him into pieces in Orange Town. Arlong's teeth rip into him because they're treated like living saw blades, not just bite damage. Enel's giant golden spear? That thing stabs through him even while lightning does nothing, which is Oda screaming, "The rubber logic only covers so much."
And once we hit CP9, Lucci's Rokuogan is basically the internal damage cheat code, rattling Luffy's organs where rubber skin doesn't help at all. Then you've got the elemental and status stuff. Extreme temperatures still mess him up. He cooks, he freezes, he suffers. Crocodile doesn't care about rubber, because dehydration bypasses the whole surface entirely. Magellan is the big one, though. His venom doesn't just hurt Luffy, it annihilates him to the point Ivankov has to gamble on hormone hacks. Oda later jokes in an SBS that Luffy probably built up some resistance after that nightmare, and to be fair, he does tank poison better in Punk Hazard and Wano, but I want to emphasize, he is not immune. The body is weirdly durable, not a universal hazard suit.
And underneath all of that, he's still a devil fruit user. Water and sea stone turn him into a wet noodle. The series keeps coming back to this because as far as tension goes, guy who can be handcuffed into uselessness is a lot more workable than invincible sun god balloon. That's why we get scenes like Arlong Park's drowning cage or the sea stone cuffs in Wano. The rubber is a joke. The ocean is not. Here's an interesting thing Oda does on the biology side, though. Luffy's appetite and metabolism are treated like a gag, but SBS and databook notes lean into the idea that his rubber body processes energy differently. He burns through food at insane speed, then rebounds from near death after a meat binge. It's cartoon logic with just enough fake science to make you go, okay, sure, that tracks. Pain, alcohol, even electricity get filtered through that same vague system. Once Haki shows up, the training wheels come off. Armament lets enemies hit the real Luffy through the rubber, and advanced forms ignore his bounce entirely. That's Oda rebalancing the power scale so our protagonist doesn't become untouchable by chapter 300. So Luffy ends up as this push-pull design, comedic invincibility wrapped around very real fragility. And that mix matters, because this fragile, chaotic presence doesn't just break physics, it quietly rewires the people around him. On panel, sure, but also in cover stories, vivre cards, and tiny offhand comments.
That's where we'll go next. The lives Luffy breaks and rebuilds without even being in the scene. The wake Luffy leaves behind, off-panel influence and quiet transformations. Luffy's real broken ability isn't Gear 5, it's career counseling. He walks into your life for like 48 hours, screams about meat, punches your god, and suddenly your 5-year plan is gone. And to be fair, Oda almost never stops the story to say this out loud. He buries it in epilogues, cover stories, and vivre card side notes like a gremlin sprinkling character development behind the panels. Because, as far as obvious examples go, we all know the Bharati and Arlong Park. Sanji literally throws away his found family to chase the All Blue after one dinner rush with this insane rubber customer. Nami goes from, "I will rob you blind" to, "This is my tangerine hat now." and reclaims Kokoyashi. That's the loud version. The interesting part is how Oda then quietly checks back in later to show that Luffy didn't just fix a single crisis. He changed the trajectory of entire locations. Here's an interesting thing. Drum Island is basically a test case for this. Luffy yeets Waypole off his own castle, laughs with a reindeer, and leaves. On panel, that's it. Off panel, Dalton becomes king. The flag stays flying. Chopper's old trauma hospital turns into a place where a talking reindeer doctor is actually respected. Vivre cards and databooks spell out that Drum modernizes, opens up, and Chopper is remembered as a national hero.
Luffy didn't write a constitution. He just made it impossible for the island to pretend the old cowardice still worked. Alabaster's the same system on hard mode. He refuses Vivi's invite, sails away, and you could think, cool arc, moving on. To which I say, have you seen how many times Oda quietly tells us she's still fighting? Vivre cards note her popularity, her political reforms, her continued surveillance of Baroque-style threats. The country doesn't snap back to status quo, because once you've watched a rubber man ring a cannonball into the sky, pretending your civil war was just a bad day is no longer an option. Then you get the deep cuts. Gaiman, the guy in the chest from East Blue, gets a whole cover story showing him happily living with the island animals, no longer this bitter joke. Kobe and Helmeppo go from background losers to literal hockey-using Marines off-panel. We see them again, and it's like Oda hit the time skip button just for them. Luffy doesn't train them, doesn't give a shonen speech. They just saw him and had to ask, am I really okay being this pathetic? Cover stories turn this into a full-blown ripple effect power. Hachi's seafloor stroll takes an hour-long lackey and walks him all the way to Sabaody, where he repays Luffy's mercy by saving Kami. Caribou's in the New World shows a clownish villain stumbling through islands wrecked by bigger forces, including Luffy-adjacent chaos, and accidentally becoming a revolutionary mascot. Luffy isn't even on screen, but his wake is. I want to emphasize how much Oda leans on this for inherited will. Luffy doesn't lecture people into changing. He lives so violently free that everyone around him either levels up or gets exposed as a coward. Vivre cards quietly confirm ex-villains fearing him, ex-nobodies admiring him, his name spreading from the ground up long before the world government's posters catch up. And some of the weirdest, most specific proof of that?
It isn't even in full cover arcs. It's in blink and you miss it cameos and crowded color spreads, where Oda hides little post-Luffy epilogues in the background. That's where we're heading next. Cameos, cover stories, and the Luffy you only see in the margins. Oda basically runs a secret second manga in the gutters and cover pages, and Luffy is the main character of that one too. If you've ever skipped a color spread because it's just art, to which I say, you've missed like 30% of the Luffy lore. Here's an interesting thing about Oda's extra pages. They're not actually extra. The covers and color spreads are where he stress tests ideas, relationships, and the Straw Hat's growing myth.
You get Luffy at the center of festival scenes, surrounded by randos from islands we haven't even visited yet, or casually sharing food with characters who won't canonically meet him for hundreds of chapters. It looks like chaos art, but it's a quiet reputation tracker. Who is drawn close to him? Who copies his pose? That's the vague social map of the series. Early on, this gets weirdly prophetic. We see Luffy, bathed in sun motifs, banging drums in summer festivals, or leading these wild parades with taiko and fireworks. At the time, you go, yeah, fun party boy. Post-Nika reveal, it's like, oh, cool. We've been staring at Joy Boy mood boards for a decade. Are these deliberate proto-Nika hints, or just Oda's default festival brain? Oda doubles down with microscopic cameos. Newspapers flashing Luffy's bounty, while background NPCs mutter about that straw hat kid, or a random bar scene where someone is bragging that they saw him once in Logtown. These are one-panel jokes that quietly say, the world is actually reacting in real time. I want to emphasize how rare that is in shonen. Most protagonists exist in a narrative bubble. Luffy exists on page and off. Cross-crew connections make it even better. Bon Clay clinging to Luffy's image in Impel Down, Hancock literally structuring Amazon Lily policy around her crush, Buggy accidentally becoming a Yonko because he once survived being near Luffy.
A lot of that is only fully confirmed in databooks and Weaver cards, where you get lines like X did this because they remembered Luffy's words. Off-screen, he's living rent-free in half the cast. And to be fair, not every cover is some galaxy brain prophecy. Sometimes Oda just wants to draw Samurai Luffy, or Space Luffy, or Luffy as a punk rocker eating 12 burgers. But then we actually get Wano Samurai Luffy. We actually get Moon Lore. The visual gag Phase 1 becomes the serious arc Phase 2. It's like he A/B tests designs in Jump before committing. So we've got this visual breadcrumb trail. Suns, drums, parties, off-screen epilogues, and imaginary Luffys living in other people's heads.
Next, we move from the margins to the margins author, Oda himself, and dig into the meta-comments, SBS answers, and scrapped ideas where he just straight up tells us what Luffy is supposed to be symbolically. Oda on Luffy's ending. Planned final panels and guarded secrets. So here's the cursed part of all this. While we're over here drawing conspiracy diagrams about suns and drums, Oda has literally had the last page of Luffy's story sitting in a drawer for decades. One Piece is this sprawling, borderline unmanageable mess of islands and power systems, and the guy's like, yeah, I already know the final panel. Cool. Great. Totally normal behavior. He's been saying this since early interviews in the East Blue era. The ending, including the final scene, was decided from the start, and he's never changed it, even as the story ballooned way past its original length. That's wild, because as far as long-running shonen goes, most authors are just trying to survive next week's storyboard. Oda, on the other hand, keeps doubling down in jump interviews and SBS. The destination is fixed, only the route got longer. Here's an interesting thing. He's even joked that he's already drawn the last chapter's final panel, or that he knows the last line of dialogue. But every time someone asks what it is, he hard swerves into troll mode. The confidence is bizarre.
It's like if your DM looked you in the eye in session 1 and said, "I know exactly how your level 20 epilogue ends," and then refused to elaborate for 25 real-world years. And he keeps warning us it's going to be divisive. Oda's said some fans will be happy, some will be angry, which is such a specific threat. Angry how? Not enough explosions? To which I say, that sounds like an ending that pokes at our expectations about treasure, power, and what pirate king even means. If Luffy is the symbol of freedom, then maybe the point is that the world's greatest free man doesn't retire into a comfy, static title. That's where the big meta-theories kick in. A lot of people read Oda's comments as hinting that Luffy's not going to end as some king on a throne, but as the guy who makes the throne meaningless. Maybe he reaches the One Piece, triggers the real revolution, and then walks away from the whole kingship idea entirely. Pirate King as a temporary narrative spell, not a permanent job. I want to emphasize something Oda repeats. This is not just a story about inherited will. He keeps saying it's about adventure and fun. So even if Luffy changes the world, the ending can't lock him into being a political figurehead. That would be the most anti-Luffy thing imaginable. He's not built to sit in meetings. He's built to ask, where's the next dumb island? At the same time, Oda has said he doesn't want a purely sad ending like some of his favorite works, but he also doesn't want a clean, sugary, happy one. So we're probably headed for that sharp, bittersweet middle. The world opens up. Some people pay real costs. Luffy gains everything and loses something you can't just punch back. And to be fair, the meta-lore here is kind of the giveaway. Because as far as Oda's concerned, the mechanics of Luffy's last moments are locked. He's guarded that secret for decades while still loudly telegraphing Luffy's symbolic trajectory. Which circles us right back to those motifs we've been tracking. The sun, the drums, the laughter, the ever-expanding idea of freedom. If the ending is fixed, those aren't random cool visuals. They're deliberate scaffolding. So next, we're going to pry those symbols open and see what kind of future they've been whispering about this whole time. Sun, drums, and laughter. The symbolic language wrapped around Luffy. So let's actually cash that check and name the 3 motifs that won't stop orbiting Luffy like he's his own tiny narrative solar system. The sun, the drums, and the laughter. If you stripped One Piece of everything else and just left those 3 wrapped around him, you'd still basically get Nika Light, which is kind of terrifying, because as far as long-term foreshadowing goes, that's absurdly efficient.
Here's an interesting thing. Oda was drawing Luffy as a walking sun long before the word Nika ever showed up. Look at early color spreads. Luffy's almost always dead center, bright primary colors, arms flung out, with speed lines or rays literally blasting out from him. On Skypia's spreads, he's framed against huge open skies. On Thriller Bark, He's the one patch of real color in a horror movie palette. Narrative-wise, he keeps sailing into dark islands and turning the lights on, blowing away Enel's endless night, punching a hole through Thriller Bark's fog, even just dragging sunny energy into places like Sabayodi and Fishman Island that are politically pitch black. Then Wano drops the line that retrofits all of that, the drums of liberation. Luffy's heartbeat literally changes.
The sound effect lettering shifts, the rhythm gets named, and suddenly his existence is not just Rubber Man Go Boing, it's a soundtrack. People hear that beat and start smiling, crying, moving again. Oda basically says this guy's life force is music, and that music's whole job is to tell you you're allowed to be free. To which I say, subtlety is dead, and I'm fine with that. Laughter is the third piece, and Oda's been weirdly strict about it. Roger laughs at the final island. His crew laughs. Odin reads the Void Century and laughs so hard he decides the only response is, open the borders. Luffy, same mould. He laughs at Crocodile while bleeding out, laughs on the scaffold in Logtown, laughs in Udon Prison, laughs in front of Kaido after getting one shot. Oda uses laughter as the final refusal. If I can still laugh, your oppression didn't work. And, to be fair, it's also a great way to keep a shonen battle from turning into a grimdark mess. This lines up with real-world symbolism almost too cleanly. The sun is life, clarity, rebirth. Drums are both war signals and festival instruments. Laughter is communal. It stitches people together in real time. Luffy is all three stacked. He storms in like sunrise, announces himself with a battle festival heartbeat, and then forces everyone into a shared joke about how stupid tyranny looks. Watch how villains react to that joy. Enel's brain blue screens because lightning doesn't work and this idiot is laughing.
Doflamingo, the guy who thinks he understands the strings of the world, absolutely loses it at Luffy's refusal to play by those rules. Kaido, who's so depressed he drinks himself into suicide attempts, only feels alive again when Luffy treats their deathmatch like the world's loudest party. Their power systems can't process someone who treats trauma like a punchline and battle like a festival of freedom. I want to emphasize, Luffy's idiocy is a weapon. By refusing to take tyrants seriously on their terms, he drags them into his arena. Sun overhead, drums pounding, everyone laughing, where hierarchy just looks embarrassing. That wasn't all locked in from day one, though.
Early romance. Dawn drafts play with similar imagery, but in a way messier, half-formed ways, and Oda's talked about scrapped, Nika-related ideas that never made it past the planning stage. Next, we'll dig into those proto-Luffys and abandoned concepts, and see how this symbolic language got sanded down into the version we actually read. Scrapped Luffy concepts. The hero Oda almost gave us. So let's talk about the Luffy that almost existed. The guy from the timeline where One Piece is still good, but kind of generic, and we're all arguing about some other series instead. Because, as far as we can tell, Oda had to kill a bunch of proto-Luffys in order to get to the stupid, joyful sun god we actually ended up with. First, quick disclaimer. Oda does not drop a neat Google Doc titled
scrapped Luffy concepts. What we have are interviews, early drafts, and art books, little fossils of ideas. You line up Romance Dawn version 1, version 2, and early concept art, and suddenly you're staring at a multiverse of almost Luffys that got quietly retired. Romance Dawn is the big one. In version 1, Luffy's still a rubber kid, but the tone is way more standard heroic. He's framed like a straightforward shonen lead, less chaotic dumbass, more composed wanderer. His dream speech is cleaner, less unhinged. He literally carries the mysterious treasure vibe more than the "I will punch a dragon because it looked at my friend" energy we know.
Version 2 pushes closer, but even then, his personality is toned down, the world feels smaller, and the hat isn't this loaded Shanks Roger Joy Boy relay baton yet. It's just a cool hat. Functional. Tragic, honestly. Here's an interesting thing. Early concept art has Luffy looking rougher, with slightly different proportions and random accessories hanging off him. He's more cluttered. You can see Oda poking at the design like pirate equals stuff, before realizing the real power move is silhouette. Strip it down to shorts, sandals, vest, hat, scar. You recognize him instantly from a stick figure. That's not an accident. That's iteration. Then there's the devil fruit question. Oda said he wanted a protagonist who could do ridiculous things in battle.
That implies he was still shopping around for what kind of ridiculous. You can easily imagine an early, less comedic power set. Some edgy Logia, or a more obviously cool Paramecia. To which I say, enjoy your forgettable smokeman protagonist. Rubber is so stupid, it loops back around into genius. And to be fair, that's exactly what lets Gear 5 and the Nika reveal land without feeling like a full genre swap. On the Nika side, Oda's admitted that Joy Boy and related ideas were floating around for ages, but the explicit Sun God branding feels late. The drums, the sun motifs, the party obsession, they're all there in vague form, but you can tell the exact label Nika was a crystallization, not step one. It's like he had the vibe file open for decades and finally named it.
He's also said he considered making the story darker or more serious at multiple points. You can feel those ghost drafts. A version where Luffy's trauma is foregrounded, where his backstory is heavier, where Ace's death pushes him into a long, brooding arc instead of ringing the "I will be stronger and freer" bell. Some of that was probably on the table, then consciously softened or redirected. I want to emphasize, every time Oda flirted with making Luffy conventionally cool, edgy, or tragic, he backed off and doubled down on dumb, laughing, free. That's the only Luffy who can become a literal cartoon god of liberation without breaking the story's spine.
And now that we've mapped the prototypes, the mythic roots, the biology, and the meta-design, we can finally do the fun part. Go arc by arc, relationship by relationship, and watch all these buried ideas quietly steer the story you thought you already knew. From prototype to Pirate King candidate, where this deep dive goes next. So where are we actually standing after all of that? We started with the cursed museum of Luffy prototypes. Romance Dawn versions who could use guns, who weren't even rubber, whose hat wasn't from Shanks,
who felt like generic adventure boys Oda had lying around. Then we watched Oda slowly sand those away and hardlock this one idiot into place. The laughing, stretchy, deceptively simple Luffy who just wants to be free. Except, as we've seen, that simple version is duct-taped to Sun Wukong, Nika, Joy Boy, Roger, Shanks, and the entire Sun and Drums liberation myth like a conspiracy board. We poked his biology until it got weird. Rubber organs that shrug off blunt trauma, electricity immunity that stops being a plot hole once you read that one SBS. Gear mechanics that are basically body horror disguised as Looney Tunes. We talked about how Gear 2 is a self-induced heart attack he calls going faster, how Gear 3 is a kaiju cosplay, and how Gear 5 is Oda finally saying the quiet God powers part out loud. We also tracked the off-panel stuff. Cover story cameos, vivre card notes, people whose lives get quietly rewired because Luffy existed in their vicinity for like 12 seconds. And we mapped the symbolic motifs that keep looping back around. The sun, the drums, the smile, the broken promise of Joy Boy, the inherited will of Roger and Shanks, and that one comment from Oda about already knowing Luffy's final scene. So I want to emphasize the central thesis again, because as far as this whole video goes, it's the spine. Luffy is engineered to look like the dumbest, most straightforward shonen protagonist in the room, while secretly being the single most overclocked convergence of folklore, meta-planning, and thematic symbolism in the series.
He's a fake blank slate who is actually doing 40 jobs at once. And once you see that, familiar scenes get cursed in the best way. Every punch is no longer just guy hits bad guy. It's Nika's liberation myth trying to fix Joy Boy's failure. Every laugh is a data point in Oda's obsession with smiles under oppression. Every stupid decision is less Luffy is dumb and more this world is being forced to accommodate a walking endgame flag. That line, I'm gonna be king of the pirates, stops being a meme and starts sounding like a threat to the entire system. So, what are we doing with the rest of this 3-hour mess? We're going arc by arc and relationship by relationship, but with this meta-lens welded on. East Blue to Egghead, we'll track how Luffy evolves, how his presence rewires people like Zoro, Nami, and Sanji, and how his clashes with villains like Crocodile, Enel, and Doflamingo are secretly ideological debates about freedom, justice, and who gets to define peace. We'll go deeper into Gear 5 and Nika, use SBS and databook scraps, and ask how much of this was planned, how much was retrofitted, and does it even matter if the thematic math still works? And to be fair, this is not going to turn into a bloated recap channel where we just narrate the manga back at you. Same playfully analytical, fast-paced style, just targeted lore surgery. We'll pull obscure quotes, weird author comments, and tiny visual motifs, and use them to make scenes you've seen 100 times feel new again.
If you thought you knew Luffy because you've heard him shout his dream on loop, to which I say, by the time we're done, that line is going to sound very, very different. So let's test this fake simple protagonist in the most grounded part of the story.
What actually happens when a secret sun god of liberation walks into East Blue, a sea built out of very human, very small-scale tragedies, and smiles at them? The rubber man who shouldn't exist. Luffy's biology versus real physics. So we drop this smiling sun god into East Blue, and the story says, "Don't worry, he's just a rubber man." To which I say, that's the most suspiciously undersold character description in shonen. Because as far as just rubber goes, this guy has casually tanked lightning, multiple poisons, organ-level trauma, and blood loss that should have turned him into a Capri Sun pouch. And to be fair, devil fruits are already a vague mess of a power system, but even inside that mess, Luffy is weird. Enel literally spams island-busting lightning, and Luffy shrugs it off because rubber doesn't conduct. Funny gag, right? Except he's been stabbed, crushed, frozen, dehydrated, and internally rearranged, and his body reacts like it's running on a different operating system from every other paramecia user we see. Here's an interesting thing. Oda has quietly explained pieces of this in SBS and databooks, and almost nobody treats it as the horror lore it actually is.
He's said Luffy's muscles, blood vessels, and even some internal organs behave like rubber, not just his skin. That's how you get stuff like organ displacement in Alabasta, where he basically shifts his insides to dodge Crocodile's hook, and the story plays it off like a Looney Tunes bit. Blunt force immunity suddenly makes more sense if your organs literally bounce, but it also means Luffy is walking around with a cardiovascular system made of bungee cords. Gear second is him overclocking that, pumping his blood at insane speed. Any normal heart would explode like a water balloon in a microwave. Luffy's heart? It just stretches, it adapts. It turns a lethal circulatory hack into a permanent power-up. Compare that to other paramecia. Mr. One doesn't have steel organs. Buggy doesn't have detachable intestines. But Luffy's bones stretch in gear third. His skeleton inflates like a balloon, and the Vivre card notes his height and weight fluctuate wildly between forms. His body temperature spikes in gear second. His physiology is not fixed. It's a constantly shifting, rubber-based experiment. And when we stack him against other rubber guys in fiction, Mr. Fantastic, Plastic Man, any generic elasticity hero, Oda is weirdly selective. Real rubber melts, tears, loses elasticity over time. Luffy never deals with micro-tears, fatigue, or joint damage. The series only remembers real physics when it's funny or cool, and forgets them when they'd limit the combat logic. I want to emphasize how alien that makes him.
Biologically, Luffy might actually be one of the least human humans in One Piece. His body can survive poisons that nearly kill him, then learn them. It can host a blood pump exploit, lightning immunity, bone inflation, and still move like a cartoon. Is it any surprise that this ends up being the vessel for a reality-bending sun god fruit? So if his simple rubber body was already this broken before Gear 4 and Gear 5, the real question isn't how strong is Luffy now, it's what did Oda always intend this thing to evolve into by the endgame, and how much of that was hiding in the joke from Chapter 1. Gear Second, the illegal technique no human should survive. So when we ask what this body was meant to evolve into, Oda's first real answer isn't Gear 5. It's something way stupider
and way scarier. Gear Second. Everyone remembers it as cool red Luffy with steam, to which I say, no, that is a child-friendly depiction of a medical emergency. On paper, Gear Second is simple. Luffy pumps his blood faster using his rubber vessels. In practice, that's a guy manually overclocking his cardiovascular system like a PC with no cooling. He's literally turning his arteries into high-pressure hoses. A normal human doing this would just get a speed-run any % heart failure. But because, as far as Oda is concerned, Luffy is rubber, he can treat basic biology like a suggestion. Look at the first reveal against Bluno. The anime makes it all hype, but the manga panels are kind of horrifying.
His skin tone shifts darker, veins bulge, his body vents steam like an overheating engine. This isn't glorious hero aura. This is self-inflicted heart condition. I want to emphasize the steam. It's not fire, not hockey. It's his body literally boiling off excess heat from pushing his circulatory system past safe limits. And here's an interesting thing. Oda immediately codes it as dangerous. Luffy wheezes, he clutches his knees, his dialogue is clipped. The power-up works, but every shot after the fight shows him slumped, drained in a way that's very different from his usual "I'm hungry" gag. It reads like a guy who just did something his body was not cleared for. Oda backs this up in trivia. In SBS and databooks, he straight up mentions Luffy's lifespan being shaved when he pushes his body too far. The Impel Down and Marineford poison and treatment get the spotlight, but the idea is seeded earlier. Repeated overuse of these gears is doing unseen damage. Post Enies lobby, you start seeing panels where Luffy is off to the side, hand near his chest, taking longer to get up even when the story doesn't comment on it. It's subtle, but once you're looking for it, it's everywhere. Compare this to Chopper's rumble balls or Ivankov's hormone boosts. Those are explicitly framed as biologically invasive hacks with hard limits. Chopper loses control. Ivankov says, "You trade years of life." Luffy is doing the same category of crime against nature, except he keeps it on as a regular movement option by Fishman Island. By Punk Hazard, he's slipping into Gear Second just to dodge casually. The temporary emergency button has been internalized into his base operating system. And to be fair, that's the contrarian angle. Gear Second stops feeling like a technique and starts looking like a visible symptom that his body is drifting away from human rules toward full Nika cartoon physics, where cardiovascular limits are just comedy props. If this is the biology hack, then the next step is obvious. What happens when he starts hacking the actual structure of his body? Because Gear Third is coming up, and that's where Oda starts inflating the skeleton itself like a balloon animal and quietly admits Luffy was never playing by human anatomy at all. Gear Third, the giant's shadow and the child's cost. So Gear Second is Luffy hacking his blood. But Gear Third is the moment Oda looks at human anatomy and goes, "What if we just didn't?" We all laughed when he whipped it out against Lucci, but if you stop giggling for 2 seconds, the dude is literally inflating his skeleton like a horror manga balloon animal. Mechanically, the manga and SBS are pretty straightforward about it. Luffy bites into his thumb joint, blows air in, and instead of puffing up his muscles or lungs, the air travels into the bone.
He then channels it through his skeletal structure, isolating it in an arm, a leg, sometimes even just a finger. And suddenly, that limb is in the weight class of a giant. It's not just big rubber punch. It's weaponized osteology, to which I say, Imagine your own bones stretching like party balloons, and tell me this isn't body horror disguised as a gag. I want to emphasize how weird that is in universe. Most devil fruits mess with flesh, elements, maybe organs. Luffy is out here running a DIY orthopedic surgery system mid-fight. And because, as far as visual storytelling goes, Oda is a menace, he sells it with those panels of buildings cracking like eggshells, shockwaves ripping down corridors, and CP9 agents staring in absolute "this should not be possible" disbelief.
Gear Third is the first time Luffy's punches feel physically too big for the setting he's in. But here's an interesting thing. The cost. Early Gear Third is treated like this dangerous, unrefined prototype. After he lets the air out, Luffy shrinks into that chibi form, losing mass, strength, and dignity all at once. It's played for comedy, sure, but it implies he's literally burned through his own volume. For a few minutes, the future Pirate King has the combat presence of a keychain. That's a massive vulnerability in a world where one random marine with a sea stone baton could just punt him into the ocean. This is also where Oda quietly links Luffy to the giant motif, those enormous limbs? They're basically Elbaf cosplay years before we ever step near a proper Elbaf arc. He's temporarily borrowing the silhouette of a giant warrior, punching like Dory and Brogy with a child's body hidden behind the fist. It's the giant's shadow and the kid's cost in one move, overwhelming power on impact, followed by a reminder that underneath all this myth-building, he's still a reckless 17-year-old overclocking a rubber body. And to be fair, Oda doesn't leave it that messy forever. Post-time skip, the chibi drawback quietly disappears. The meta-read is obvious. Luffy's control and capacity have grown, so his bones can handle inflation without destabilizing. But the contrarian reading is more fun. Gear Third looks like an early, clumsy attempt at the giant cartoon body logic that Gear 5 will fully embrace.
It's proto-Nika visual language. Exaggerated limbs, impossible silhouettes, anatomy as a suggestion. So what happens when you stop treating the gears as separate modes and start seeing them as steps toward one unified, reality-bending fighting style? Because the next stage is where he stops just inflating parts and starts restructuring his whole body into a living, bouncing fortress. Gear 4 is coming, and that's where the giant shadow stops being a limb and becomes the entire frame.
Gear 4, the cartoon monster, Oda slipped into a serious arc. Gear 4 is Oda walking into Dressrosa, one of the bleakest arcs in the series, and saying, what if the final boss fight looked like a balloon animal with tattoos? We go from toys as war crimes, child slavery, and generational trauma, to Luffy turning into a round, bouncing exclamation mark. And to be fair, it should not work. But it does, because as far as One Piece is concerned, tonal whiplash is just another combat mechanic, context first. Dressrosa is framed like a grounded political thriller, coups, underground markets, legacy of abuse. Then, at the absolute emotional peak, Oda debuts Bound Man. No sleek Super Saiyan lines, no edgy cloak, just a hulking silhouette with hockey tribal patterns and tiny legs.
People wanted a cool time skip form, to which I say, Oda very clearly did not. He wanted you to laugh for half a second before realizing this balloon is about to dismantle a warlord. Mechanically, Gear 4 is the synthesis project. Luffy pulls Gear 2's blood acceleration,
Gear Third's bone inflation, and then compresses his entire rubber body like a coiled spring, all wrapped in armament. He's literally turning himself into a living, pressurized cannonball. The haki isn't just armor. It's a pressure lock, holding that compressed rubber in place, so every punch is a recoil event. That's why his attacks fire him backward. He's not just hitting Doflamingo, he's ricocheting through the arena like a human pinball.
And here's an interesting thing. Visually, Boundman already cheats physics in a way that looks suspiciously like early Nika. He sinks into the ground and bounces back up with no realistic conservation of momentum. His torso squashes and stretches on impact. He ricochets mid-air at angles that make zero sense unless the world itself is participating in the joke. You can freeze-frame some panels, and they read like Looney Tunes storyboards more than a serious shonen brawl. Oda has said in SBS and interviews that he wants Luffy's power-ups to stay funny and uncool compared to the standard edgy shonen escalation. Gear 4 is that compromise between gag and intimidation. The silhouette is ridiculous. The facial expressions are wild, but the damage output is terrifying. I want to emphasize how intentional that is. Luffy is never allowed to become a stoic, pretty transformation guy. His apex is always a little stupid-looking. Look at the three forms. Boundman is compression, everything packed tight for explosive bursts. Tankman is mass. He weaponizes sheer volume, turning his belly into a black hole for Katakuri. Snakeman is elasticity. Reduced bulk, insane rebound vectors, his arms literally curving around observation haki. Each one is just Luffy picking a single rubber property and dialing it past what a human silhouette should support. Notice the side effects. In Gear 4, his proportions warp, his eyes bug, his grin stretches wider, even his speech patterns get punchier and more exaggerated. It's like his personality is inflating with his body.
You kind of get this sense that the Luffy we know is slipping towards something more primal and toon-like. So here's the contrarian pitch. Gear 4 isn't just a haki upgrade, it's Luffy's biology testing the upper limit of rubber logic before the human frame breaks and the cartoon god walks out. Boundman is already a prototype Nika, just shackled by exhaustion timers and haki costs. And once you see it that way, Gear 5 doesn't feel like a random god retcon at all. It feels like the inevitable endpoint of every silly, overpressurized gear that came before. The moment the series stops pretending this is enhanced rubber and admits we've been watching reality get primed for full toon takeover.
So when the drums finally start and Luffy hits Gear 5, remember, Dressrosa's bouncing monster was the warning label. The immunity myth. What Luffy can't actually tank. So we've just crowned Luffy as a full-on reality-bending cartoon god. And immediately the internet goes, he's immune to everything now. To which I say, no, he's not. And the places where he very much dies, if the plot doesn't intervene, are where the real lore is hiding. Because as far as canonical resistances go, Luffy's kit is actually pretty specific. He's rubber, so blunt force mostly just turns him into a bouncy castle. Bellamy's spring punches, Enel's staff hits, even getting slammed into buildings over and over, that's Tuesday. Electricity? NL literally discovers he hard counters himself. Databooks and SBS material double down on this, saying his body conducts poorly and dulls electrical damage. He can even slip some rigid restraints because his body deforms around them. That's why basic ropes and stretch-based torture gags are more comedy than threat. But here's an interesting thing. The series never says invincible. The Vivre cards and databooks are very clear that cutting and piercing attacks are his natural weakness. Swords, bullets, claws, those don't bounce. Early Luffy is constantly terrified of sharp things for a reason. What changes post-time skip is not his biology, it's hockey. Armament and later Conqueror's coating are what let him clash with swordsmen and Yonko punches, not some secret upgrade to Rubber 2.0.
I want to emphasize that, because people love to fold his hockey progression into the rubber immunity myth, when it's actually a separate power system patching a known flaw. And to be fair, the story goes out of its way to show stuff that absolutely wrecks him. Water and drowning? Still game over. Sea stone? He face plants instantly. Internal damage? Lucci's Rokugan, Kaido's club, even simple organ shock. All of that hurts. Extreme fatigue and hunger reduce him to a wheezing noodle. Emotional trauma? Post-Marineford Luffy is so broken he literally stops wanting to live until Jinbei drags him back. If he were immune to poison, impel down just wouldn't happen. Magellan's Hydra turns him into a melting corpse. Ivankov's hormone treatment is basically a negotiated respawn that shaves years off his life. That's not resistance. That's a brutal trade. Caesar's gas in Punk Hazard just deletes him on contact. He's rubber, not a hazmat suit. And then you get the smaller, almost petty examples that quietly kill the invincible rubber man narrative. He nearly freezes to death on Drum and again on Punk Hazard. He gets fevers, infections, basic sickbed arcs. Oda literally draws chibi Luffy with a thermometer in his mouth, like your average flu patient. This god of freedom is still weak to didn't wear a coat. So why keep all these mundane weaknesses while turning him into a sun god avatar? Probably because Oda wants the victories to feel earned. The body can cartoon through blunt hits and lightning, but hunger, exhaustion, drowning, those are human limits. That contrast is doing thematic work, and it raises a really fun question for the endgame. When your protagonist is on track to become the world's literal drumbeat of liberation, why is he still one bad infection and a deep ocean away from dying like any other guy? And is that gap actually the whole point of his character arc? Sun Wukong, Nika, and the monkey in Luffy's name. So when we talk about that gap between drums of liberation and guy who can still drown in a puddle, we kind of have to address the giant screaming clue in his passport. His last name is literally Monkey. Not D-Monkey, not some cool Latin phrase, just Monkey. And Oda is not subtle. Because as far as trickster archetypes go, East Asia already has the blueprint. Sun Wukong, the Monkey King from Journey to the West. Sun Wukong is basically the original problem child of heaven. He rebels against the gods, trashes the celestial bureaucracy, gets sentenced to death like 5 different ways,
and just doesn't stay dead. Unkillable body? Luffy gets lightning, poison, impalement, and a full Marineford trauma package, and keeps bouncing. Staff weapon? Wukong has his Ruyi Jingu Bang. Luffy's staff is his own body, turning limbs into poles and whips to smack literal giants and gods. Cloud riding? Wukong has the somersault cloud. Luffy slingshots through the sky, runs on air with Gear 4th, and now straight up bounces on nothing in Gear 5 like gravity is a suggestion. And the attitude lines up. Wukong is playfully arrogant. Luffy laughs in the face of Enel's "I am God" speech, mocks the celestial dragon's status, and treats the world government like a mildly annoying landlord. That whole rebel against heaven thing? In One Piece terms, that's declaring war on the world government at Enies Lobby and burning their flag for funsies. Here's an interesting thing. Visually, Oda has been sneaking Sun Wukong energy into Luffy for years. Luffy loves perching on high places, silhouetted against the sun on ship masts and rooftops. He drums on things with his fists constantly, banging on the Going Merry, pounding on drums at festivals, hammering his own chest. Those panels of him grinning up into the light, tiny against a massive sun, that's not random composition. That's monkey against the heavens framing. Then Wano drops Nika, the sun god worshipped by slaves, and suddenly the monkey is also the sun. Nika is described as a laughing, dancing liberator. Gear 5 Luffy is a rubber cartoon who can't stop smiling, dancing on clouds, and turning the battlefield into a festival. People say, "Wow, that came out of nowhere," to which I say, did it? We literally see ancient Nika silhouettes with the same goofy pose and stretched limbs. As far as symbolism goes, that's a brick to the face. Oda has said he wanted Luffy to be joy incarnate, and I want to emphasize how neatly that plugs into Nika's role. A god whose power is liberation through laughter. The drums of liberation sound effect that plays with Luffy's heartbeat is just the logical endpoint of decades of panels of him drumming, partying, and dragging people into his chaos. And, to be fair, the solar imagery has been around forever. Early color spreads put Luffy in fields of sunflowers under blinding blue skies, front and center at summer festivals, fireworks exploding behind that straw hat halo. Long before the word Nika exists, he's framed like a walking midsummer. The contrarian read here is that Luffy isn't a destined messiah. He's a modern Sun Wukong remix who accidentally inherits a god mantle by being too much himself. A chaotic, freedom-obsessed monkey whose vibe is so strong it syncs with an ancient sun deity. And if that's true, then his link to Shanks, Roger, and Joy Boy isn't about bloodline spreadsheets at all. It's about inheriting a very specific will and role in the world, which raises a much bigger question. What kind of person keeps attracting the next Joy Boy label across generations? And why does that pattern always orbit this same ridiculous smile? Joy Boy's echo. Luffy in the Shanks, Roger, Nika lineage. So let's answer that directly. Luffy is not some lucky rubber intern who stumbled into God mode. He's basically the latest patch in a centuries-long freedom update Oda's been sneak-installing on the world. And to be fair, that sounds insane until you actually line up the versions. Here's an interesting thing.
The chain starts with Joy Boy in the Void Century, the guy who literally made a promise so big a continent-sized elephant is still walking to fulfill it. Around that, you have the myth of Nika, the sun god who dances, laughs, and frees slaves. Fast forward, and you get Roger, the first modern pirate king, who reaches Laugh Tale, hears the full joke of history, and laughs instead of crying. Shanks then becomes the bridge, carrying Roger's hat, Roger's dream, and, very conveniently, the Nika fruit into the next era. Straight into Luffy's mouth. Because as far as the old generation is concerned, Luffy isn't new. Rayleigh sees him on Sabaody and basically speedruns the "oh, this again" reaction. Oden's journal makes Yamato look at Luffy and go, "That's him. That's the guy." Zunisha hears the drums of liberation and doesn't say, "Who's that?" It says, "Joy Boy has returned." The world isn't reacting like, "Wow, crazy rookie." It's reacting like a long-delayed notification finally popped up. And then we have Shanks's extremely suspicious fruit logistics. We're told the Red Hair Pirates stole the Gomu Gomu no Mi from a world government ship. To which I say, why that random mid-paramecia? Except it's not mid, it's Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, a literal chaos engine for the status quo. Shanks just happens to park that fruit in front of one specific kid on one specific island, and then leave him the exact same hat Roger wore. That's not an accident. That's a handoff. I want to emphasize how much Luffy mirrors Roger more than Dragon or Garp. Databooks and SBS paint Roger as someone who loved adventure for its own sake, laughed at the wrong moments, and inspired loyalty from people who should have hated him. That's Luffy's whole operating system. He laughs in Logtown facing execution, just like Roger did. He turns defeat into mythic turning points. Marineford, Whole Cake, Wano. People who barely know him, Vivi, Rebecca, random cover story cameos, rearrange their entire lives around this idiot in a vest. Oda keeps yelling "inherited will" at us. Dreams don't die. They move hosts. Roger couldn't be Joy Boy, so he waited for the one who will surpass us. Luffy's dream isn't just be Pirate King, it's be the freest man on the seas, which is Nika in a sentence. The contrarian take is that Luffy isn't special because of his fruit alone. He's special because personality, fruit, era, and allies all finally sync with the Nika/Joy Boy role. Which leaves one last loaded question. That secret dream Luffy told Sabo, Ace, and later the crew, the one Oda keeps censoring, what kind of wish is so big it embarrassed Roger, moved Shanks to tears, and might be the missing piece to finish Joy Boy's broken promise? The dream we still don't know. Luffy's real endgame. So let's talk about the dumbest, most important redacted sentence in all of shonen. Oda will casually drop ancient weapons and genocide in clear text, but the second Luffy opens his mouth about his real dream, hard cut, reaction shot, censor bar made of speech bubbles. The running gag is almost a horror movie at this point. Kid Luffy tells Ace and Sabo his dream on Dawn Island. We zoom out. The boys are stunned, then laugh, then swear to help. Post Wano, around the campfire, he finally tells the crew what he wants to do after becoming Pirate King. And again, we get faces only. Nami and Usopp are like, "That's impossible." Frankie's hyped, Robin is quietly moved, and Jinbei's sitting there like he just heard the Void Century summarized in one stupid sentence. We even get meta callbacks, like Sabo remembering that thing Luffy said, and comparing it to what Roger told Odin. The story keeps pointing at it without ever letting us hear it.
Here's an interesting thing. Oda has flat out said in interviews that this dream is something he decided very early, around the Romance Dawn era. It's childish, but crucial to the story, to which I say that's the most Luffy thing possible. This is the guy whose grand political stance is usually, "My friend is crying, so I punch the government." Of course, his ultimate wish is going to sound like a kid's diary entry strapped to an apocalyptic power system. If we just read the reactions, the pattern is weirdly consistent. People don't react like he said, "I'll destroy the world government." They react like he said something grand, absurd, and deeply personal. Some laugh because it sounds impossible. Some are stunned because of the scale, and a few are genuinely touched.
That's not a manifesto, that's a wish. It's closer to, "I want everyone to share this joy I feel," than, "I will rule you all." So what is it? The big theories all orbit the same axis. A world party, everyone eating together, removing borders, making a world where no one is hungry or enslaved. Luffy's obsessions are stupidly consistent. Food, friends, freedom. He throws hands over meat rations, slave collars, and people being told they can't sail where they want. Because as far as his brain is concerned, those are the same crime. Stealing joy. Tie that to Joy Boy. Joy Boy's failed promise to the fishmen was basically, "Someday you'll live on the surface as equals." He couldn't deliver.
Luffy's hidden dream feels like the upgraded all-species patch to that bugged vow. Not just fishmen, not just one island, but literally everyone gets to dance in the sun together. And to be fair, the mystery isn't about shock value. It's about saving that emotional nuke for the endgame, probably around Raftel, when we finally understand what the man of liberation actually wants to liberate people into. We don't know the exact wording yet, but I want to emphasize this. The world is already quietly shifting toward that dream. In side stories, cover pages, and off-panel updates, we can track how Luffy's chaos keeps nudging the planet toward a shared, stupidly joyful future. And in the next section, we're going to dig into those obscure little ripples you probably forgot existed.
Luffy's invisible footprints, off-panel influence across the seas. So if Luffy's dream is quietly rewiring the planet, the funny part is that half the rewiring happens when he's not even in the room. His real power isn't just punching gods, it's leaving behind these invisible footprints that keep walking without him. We turn the page, move to the next island, and somewhere off-panel, the entire socio-political climate just updates. Here's an interesting thing. A huge chunk of that is literally hidden in cover stories. Kobe and Helmeppo are the cleanest example. Luffy humiliates Morgan, frees Kobe, and then just sails away like, "Good luck with your trauma, nerds." Cut to the cover serial. Kobe grinding in Marine boot camp. Helmeppo getting dragged out of his rich kid mess. Garp screaming them into shape. That one goofy East Blue encounter becomes the origin story for a future admiral candidate and a sword officer. People call Luffy reckless, to which I say, yes, but also he's accidentally HR for the next generation of marine reformers. Same pattern with Hachi. In Arlong Park, he's a mid-boss octopus guy. Luffy breaks the crew, walks off, credits roll. Off-panel? Hachi's redemption arc in the cover story, running a takoyaki stand, saving Kami, eventually becoming the emotional bridge that even lets the Straw Hats into Fishman Island politics.
Luffy never sits down and designs this system of change. He just kicks over a tyranny and the debris rearranges itself into new lives. Baroque Works is even funnier. Luffy smashes Crocodile and suddenly all these ex-assassins get forced into a gap year. The cover stories show Mr. 2 becoming a martyr queen, Mr. 3 and Miss Golden Week doing weird artsy stuff, the crew slowly shedding the Baroque identity. It's Luffy's chaos as a career counselor. He defeats you, and your new job is person with actual agency. And to be fair, Oda doesn't keep this only in drawings on the volume flaps. Vivre cards and databooks quietly mention islands that now celebrate Luffy like a folk hero, adjust their pirate traffic, or shift their politics.
Some ports are safer because pirates are suddenly scared of that straw hat guy showing up. Others are wilder because his example convinces locals to go chase freedom instead of staying home and paying taxes. Meanwhile, the callbacks keep reminding us that those places still exist. Fuchsia Village isn't frozen in time. Makino has a kid. The bandits gossip about Luffy's bounty. Kaya in Syrup Village studies medicine because of Usopp's stories and, by extension, Luffy's intrusion. Drum becomes the Sakura Kingdom. Alabasta hangs on by a thread of stability, all in a world Luffy helped violently reboot. We rarely go back, but the narrative acts like we could at any moment, because as far as branding goes, the world government is Luffy's unpaid marketing team.
Every new bounty poster spreads his grin into bars, slums, and marine cafeterias. For some people, he's a demon. For others, he's proof you can punch a warlord and live. We literally see characters decide to go to sea, join the Marines, or stand up to their local tyrant because they heard about that straw hat. Luffy becomes a rumor with a Jolly Roger. I want to emphasize this. That's already myth behavior. Long before Nika drums or Gear 5, he's functionally a campfire story. Another Joy Boy prototype built out of exaggerated bar talk. You can almost feel the post-endgame world turning into a planet of Luffy stories, which raises a terrifyingly fun question. If his shadow is going to be that big, how does Oda even end this guy's presence without breaking his own world? The people who changed because of him, Luffy's quietest bonds. And the wild part is, half those future Luffy stories are going to be about people he barely remembers. We all know the headline bonds, right? Zoro's loyalty, Nami's map, Sanji's chivalry. That's the marketing package. But as far as the actual world is concerned, Luffy is a quiet biological weapon for character development, just walking around turning side characters into different people without even clocking it.
Vivi is the cleanest early example. On paper, she's the princess who traveled with the crew and then didn't join. In practice, Luffy forces her into a decision no royal advisor would ever script. He doesn't give her a speech about politics. He punches her in the face mid-breakdown and yells that if she wants to stop the war, she has to be willing to put her life on the line. Horrible HR technique, fantastic shonen therapy. The X marks on their arms, that whole "we are friends even if our paths diverge" bit, become her political ideology. She rules Alabasta not as a distant monarch, but as someone who literally carved solidarity into her skin. Here's an interesting thing. The most important thing Luffy gives her isn't power, it's permission to choose. Kobe is the same system, different side of the law. Terrified cabin boy, zero self-worth, working for a clown with an actual dog theme.
Luffy shows up, asks what he wants, and when Kobe mutters, "I want to be a Marine," Luffy just goes, "Okay, then do that," and punches him in the face too. Pattern detected. That one act of recognition is the backbone of Kobe's whole arc. Marineford is the callback. Kobe freezes the battlefield. Luffy is half dead, and their eye contact is basically, "You really did it, huh?" Luffy doesn't give him a big ideology speech about justice. He simply exists so loudly that Kobe has to decide what kind of Marine he's willing to be. And to be fair, that's more terrifying than any sermon. Dressrosa gives us the Rebecca Kairos variant. Luffy takes one look at this traumatized gladiator girl and just decides, unilaterally, "You're not killing Doflamingo."
That's my job.
It's not chivalry in the traditional sense. It's him refusing to let her entire life be defined by revenge. That creates space for Kyros to step back into her life as a father instead of a weapon. Luffy basically patches a broken family by being stubborn about who's allowed to throw hands. Then you've got Bon Clay, the patron saint of "Luffy made me do it." Luffy treats Mr. 2 as a friend from the second that goofy swanhead appears. Zero hesitation, no caveats. That reckless acceptance is what Bon keeps paying back with compound interest, sacrificing his ship escape at Alabasta, trading places at Impel Down, and that full Okama Way stand against Magellan's forces. That whole sequence reads like a love letter to Luffy's influence.
Bon isn't dying for an ideology. He's dying for the guy who looked at him and didn't flinch. And this ripple effect keeps hitting people who only brush past him. Kobe's fellow recruits, who hear about the pirate who saved a Marine, random impelled down prisoners who watch him charge toward hell for one brother, small-time pirates who see him punch a celestial dragon and suddenly start aiming higher than East Blue Thug. I want to emphasize, Luffy doesn't develop people with lectures. He's so uncompromisingly himself that everyone around him has to confront what they actually want. You either double down on your cowardice or you level up, which is exactly why the world government doesn't just see him as a strong pirate. They see him as a walking, laughing contagion of freedom.
One punch you can handle. One idea that spreads on every island. To which I say, that's the real endgame boss. And the deeper you go into how the government talks about him, the more you realize they're not just afraid of his fists, they're afraid of his stories. Why the world government is actually terrified of Luffy. So when the world government slaps a big number on Luffy's head,
It looks like they're scared of raw stats. Big bounty, big problem, right? To which I say, if it were just about damage per punch, they'd be way more stressed about people who can casually vaporize islands. What actually freaks them out is that every time this man shows up, a whole political ecosystem just collapses. Look at the trail. Alabasta isn't just a cool desert arc. It's a near regime change where a royal family barely keeps its throne after a warlord-backed coup. Luffy beats Crocodile, and suddenly the idea that a government-approved hero can be a villain is public. Then Eni's lobby happens, and this is where the sirens start blaring. Because as far as symbols go, burning the world government's judicial island is like graffitiing the Supreme Court and then posing for the newspaper. From there, it escalates. Impel Down is supposed to be a one-way prison, and Luffy turns it into a clown car jailbreak for the worst criminals on the planet. That chaos directly bleeds into Marineford, where he doesn't just crash a war, he publicly defies 3 admirals, Sengoku, and a whole propaganda machine on live broadcast.
Dressrosa? That's a warlord and underground broker toppled in front of the world, with a literal column of toys turned slaves as witnesses. Wano? Now we're talking Yonko-level regime collapse. Closed borders cracking open, and a factory system feeding the Navy's war machine getting nuked by one rubber idiot in a drum solo. The Gorosei and the Marines are not dumb. They connect dots. We get lines tying Luffy to Dragon, the world's worst criminal, and those scenes where they whisper about the will of D like it's a cursed file they don't want to open. Luffy isn't just Dragon's kid. He's also wearing Roger's hat via Shanks, and now he's Nika flavored on top.
I want to emphasize how much of a convergence mess this is. Revolutionary bloodline, D lineage, inherited will from the last pirate king, and a literal sun god fruit that their ancestors tried to erase from history. Here's an interesting thing. Even the paperwork starts panicking. Early wanted posters frame him as a goofy rookie pirate. Over time, the wording shifts, the images get more serious, and newspapers stop calling his incidents isolated. They start using language like liberation, allied forces, uprisings. His bounty jumps don't just follow power spikes, they follow moments where he destabilizes an entire system. Why does Gear Second not get him as big a raise as, say, Dressrosa? Because Dressrosa proves he can flip a whole country, and he does it by accident. The alliances with Law, Kid, and the Worst Generation are not some 4D chess manifesto. They're, you seem fun, let's punch the same guy. And to be fair, that's hilarious, until you realize the Marines suddenly have multi-front crises. Wano, the Reverie Fallout, Sabo, Cross Guild, all tangled with people who sailed in Luffy's wake. He's dangerous precisely because he has no ideological PDF you can download. You can negotiate with Dragon's Revolution. It has goals. How do you bargain with a guy whose entire political platform is, my friends should be free, and meat should be available? Which is where Nika comes in. The God of Liberation isn't about policy. He's about joy and chaos as a cosmic power source.
The government isn't just scared strategically. They're scared mythologically, like history itself is laughing at them. And that fear doesn't just exist at the top. On a way smaller scale, inside the Sunny, that same unpredictability forces every straw hat to quietly ask, how far am I actually willing to go if he decides to flip the next island too. Captain of Chaos. How Luffy actually leads the Straw Hats. Inside the Sunny, that quiet, "How far would I go?" question runs into a very annoying problem. The guy asking it is allegedly a terrible captain. You've seen the takes. Luffy's dumb, he just rushes in, Zoro is the real leader. To which I say, mate, if this is what a bad captain looks like, every shonen team meeting should be held on a rubber boat. Here's an interesting thing about Luffy's leadership. It's not a strategy chart. It's an emotional calibration system. He doesn't sit down with a whiteboard. He just treats people's hearts like compasses and then actually follows them. Arlong Park is the cleanest early example. Nami doesn't give him a briefing, she gives him a breakdown, stabbing her own shoulder and finally screaming for help. Luffy doesn't ask for context, he doesn't negotiate odds, he just silently puts the hat on her head and walks forward like a one-man HR violation. That's not recklessness, that's him reading exactly what she needs and deciding as captain that her pain is now crew business. Same with Enies Lobby. On paper, declaring war on the world government by punching their flag is the dumbest tactical move in the series. But Luffy's not doing geopolitics, he's doing Robin's self-worth. She says, "I want to live," and he instantly scales the conflict to match the size of that sentence. Because as far as he's concerned, if your dream is that big, the enemy has to be that big too. And then you get the flip side. Sabaody. The man who will throw hands at God looks at Kizaru, pacifistas, a Tenryubito incident, and Kuma, and just says it. We're retreating. No big speech, just a hard captain call. It actually breaks him that he can't protect them, which is why that moment hits so much harder in retrospect.
We meme Luffy as brainless, but he knows exactly when his power and his crew's safety don't line up. The loud moments get all the edits, but Luffy's captaincy lives in the quiet panels. Him listening to Usopp's ridiculous lies and playing along, because he understands that Usopp's bravado is a life support system. Him respecting Sanji's pride in whole cake, refusing to drag him back by force, literally starving in the rain instead. Him giving Zoro space to handle things his own way, whether it's the Mihawk duel or that creepy nothing happened night with Kuma. I want to emphasize, he sees them. He just doesn't narrate that he sees them. And to be fair, the crew sees him too. You get these obscure little panels where they explicitly say it.
Nami trusting that if Luffy chose a path, it'll work out somehow. Robin quietly smiling when he makes an insane demand because she knows his instincts only fire when history is about to bend. Frankie and Jinbei deferring to his calls even when they don't get the plan, because as far as they're concerned, his gut is the only log pose that matters. He delegates without ever using the word. Nami runs navigation, Robin runs intel, Frankie runs ship safety, Jinbei runs diplomacy, Chopper runs medical, Brook runs morale, Zoro runs pure threat. Luffy doesn't micromanage. He just assumes you're the world's best at your thing and behaves like that's already true. It's reckless faith as a management style, but his recklessness is weirdly calculated in emotional terms.
He'll risk everything for a friend's heart, but he won't steal their choices. Vivi gets to stay. Sanji gets to walk away. Even Usopp gets to have his stupid pride war over the going merry, and Luffy respects it enough to actually fight him seriously. So you end up with this contrarian situation where Luffy is one of the most effective leaders in shonen, not because he plans well, but because he hard aligns everyone's personal dreams into a shared trajectory called freedom. It looks chaotic from the outside. From the inside, it's the most consistent system in the series. And that chaos doesn't come from nowhere. It's shaped by that tiny village on Dawn Island and this absolutely cursed three-part father figure situation he grew up with.
If you want to know why his captaincy feels like a bar fight, a campfire, and a revolution all at once, we kind of have to go back to Fuchsia. Raised by a fist, a bandit, and a pirate. Luffy's three dads. Luffy is not a free spirit who just spawned out of a meat-filled void. He's what happens when you accidentally mix three incompatible parenting styles and then give the kid a god fruit. People love to say he grew up without parents, to which I say, my guy had so many dads, the narrative had to ship one of them off to sea, one to the mountains, and one back to Marine HQ, just to keep the power balance stable. So let's lay out the triangle of chaos. You've got Garp, literal marine hero, the man the world government points at when they want to say, see, the system works. You've got Dadan, chain-smoking mountain bandit who treats children like defective grenades. And then Shanks, emperor of vibes, pirate captain whose grand strategy is laughing loudly and accidentally changing world history. Luffy's personality is basically what happens when you throw those three into a blender, and, because as far as Oda is concerned, this is a normal idea, make the smoothie rubber. Garp first. His training is just child abuse with cardio. Throwing Luffy into the jungle, dropping him off cliffs, tying him to balloons.
And to be fair, the series plays this as comedy. But look at Kid Luffy's face in some of those panels. He's not just scared, he's confused. He can't square Garp's brutal methods with the way Garp still brings food, still shows up. That's where Luffy's weird justice comes from. He hates institutional justice, but he absolutely believes in personal responsibility. He doesn't care if you're a Marine or pirate. If you punch a friend, you're wrong. Full stop. That's Garp's stubbornness, stripped of uniforms. Then Dadan. She starts as the government-mandated babysitter who clearly wants a refund. But she's the one who actually teaches Luffy how to live like an outlaw without losing his heart. Survive in the forest. Steal when you have to. Protect your own because no one else will. Here's an interesting thing. Those early scenes where Luffy gets beaten bloody by the mountain beasts? He cries, he rages, but he keeps going back out. That's not Garp watching. That's Dadan watching from the shadows, silently betting on him. Found family over blood ties is not a vague theme. It's literally his childhood housing situation. And then Shanks walks in and speedruns formative trauma. The bar scene with Higuma is the template for Luffy's entire conflict style. Laugh off the insults, don't rise to every bait, knock back a drink. But the second a gun comes out, the second a friend is threatened, the mood flips. Shanks doesn't just lose an arm, he defines Luffy's line in the sand. I want to emphasize how much Luffy tries to imitate him. The way he sits on the bar, the casual grin, even that little shrug when he says he'll become king of the pirates, he's doing a kid's impression of red-haired Shanks. All of this creates a moral code that is weirdly selective. He rejects Garp's institutional justice but keeps the raw courage. He refuses to be a selfish bandit like Dadan's crew, but clings to their "we protect our own" rule. He adopts Shank's carefree piracy, but weaponizes it into something more radical: freedom as a duty to others. Luffy isn't emotionally fatherless. He's overfathered, and the whole story is him editing that inheritance. Which parts of Garp's toughness survive Marineford? Which parts of Shank's smile crack when he actually loses someone? That's where it gets dark, because this messy upbringing doesn't just shape how he lives, it shapes how he breaks. And when Ace dies, we see which dad's lessons shatter first, and which ones quietly keep him moving. The day the rubber snapped, Ace's death, and Luffy's breakdown. Marineford gets marketed as the big war arc, but as far as Luffy's story goes, it's actually the arc where the main character's brain blue screens. The cannons and admirals are window dressing. The real battlefield is this kid's illusion that if he just punches harder, nobody he loves will ever die. Here's an interesting thing. Oda spends hundreds of chapters building Luffy's fake invincibility. Crocodile? Beat. Enel, literal lightning god. Natural rubber counter, whatever, also beat. Lucci, government murder machine, barely, but still beat. The system is, Luffy charges, the world breaks. Marineford is the first time the world charges and Luffy breaks. Walk through the Ace sequence in slow motion. Luffy's sprint to the platform is pure shonen autopilot. Rubber arms slingshotting, organs already shredded by earlier fights. But we're conditioned to think, yeah, he'll make it. He does. The key snaps, the cuffs fall, and we even get that tiny victory panel where Ace smiles and Luffy just collapses in relief. That's the fake ending. That's the series we thought we were in. Then Akainu moves, and Oda does something evil with Luffy's face. When the fist goes through Ace, Luffy's eyes don't widen, they empty.
You can literally track the frames. Shock, then this terrifying blank where his pupils vanish and his mouth hangs open. No witty comeback, no rage power-up, just a kid whose operating system just crashed. People remember the audible scream, but I want to emphasize the silent one. There's that panel where Luffy's mouth is open, but the sound effect belongs to everyone else. The world is screaming around him, while he just doesn't. His rubber body, usually this hyperactive mess of motion, goes totally slack. When Jinbei grabs him, Luffy isn't struggling or stretching away. His limbs dangle like a puppet with the strings cut. The rubber man finally snaps by not snapping back. And to be fair, Oda doesn't magic that away with the timeskip title card. The real breakdown is Amazon Lily, post-war, when the adrenaline is gone and reality catches up. Luffy pounding the ground, chanting this list of failures. Ace, Vivi, Bonchan, my crew, is one of the only times he directly attacks his own worth. He literally asks if he's too weak to be Pirate King. This is the guy who punched a celestial dragon because he was annoyed, now unable to imagine himself as the guy who reaches his own dream. That's as close as he ever gets to quitting. Oda said he needed Luffy to fail big to justify the time skip and power jump. To which I say, sure, that's the meta, but on the page it reads like a necessary psychological reset. Ace's death rewires his priorities. Before, training is boring, planning is for Nami,
and allies are nice but optional.
After Marineford, he writes a message to delay the reunion, submits to Rayleigh's brutal regimen, and leans into the idea that his crew is his actual power system, even if he still does dumb, impulsive stuff on the surface. The contrarian take is that Marineford isn't the birth of Joy Boy Luffy. It's the funeral for nothing can really go wrong Luffy. The dream survives, but the version of himself who could casually carry it does not. And that's our cliffhanger, because the time skip isn't just a training montage, it's a 2-year exile where a broken rubber boy has to quietly rebuild his body, his future, and the self-belief needed to one day wear Nika's smile without it cracking.
2 years in the pressure cooker, the time skip Luffy. We didn't see, so when we cut from Luffy screaming over Ace's grave to Luffy just casually drop-kicking a Kraken in the face, it kind of feels like the series hit skip intro on the most important training arc of all time. And that gap is not a mistake. That gap is Oda basically saying, you want to know what happened? Look at who he is now. Because as far as on-panel material goes, Rusukaina is almost a black box. We get Rayleigh's time skip postcard, some beasts, some food, fade to white. But post-time skip Luffy walks back in with Conqueror's haki that can floor an entire stadium, armament solid enough to crack pacifistas, and observation that lets him casually dodge laser spam. Gear 2nd and 3rd are no longer this self-destructive speed drug and balloon gimmick. They're standard tools he can chain together for hours in Fishman Island and Punk Hazard without coughing up a lung. Here's an interesting thing. Those are the obvious upgrades, the ones the power system wants you to notice. What's way more interesting is the emotional patch notes. This is the same guy, but he doesn't rush into Marineford 2.0 on Fishman Island when the Noah is falling. He actually thinks about how to minimize casualties, coordinates with Shirahoshi, and trusts his crew to handle key parts. Punk Hazard? He doesn't just solo smash Caesar. He sets up Law, leverages Smoker, and quietly avoids turning that island into another trauma museum. People like to say, time skip Luffy is more serious now, to which I say, sort of, but not in the edgy fanfic way. He's not joyless. He's learning how to protect the joy. You can see it in the way he lets Zoro and Sanji take whole fights without butting in, or how he reads Nami and Jinbei's emotions and adjusts instead of bulldozing. Post-time skip, he has these tiny, quiet beats before big clashes, standing on Fishman Island before punching Hody through the Noah, or on Dressrosa's plateau, where you can feel him checking, is this going to become another ace? Oda has said Rayleigh is strict but understanding, which is basically the bizarro version of Garp's throw small children at mountains curriculum. Garp forged durability through pain. Rayleigh forges discipline through explanation. I want to emphasize how wild that must have been for Luffy, a mentor who actually tells him why pushing Gear 2nd non-stop will kill him, then makes him do it anyway, but with structure instead of pure trauma. And to be fair, Rusukaina itself is the third teacher. That island is a daily reminder that his body has limits. Every oversized murder bird is a test case in turning Gear 2nd and 3rd from risky hacks into stable code, the groundwork that makes Gear 4 even remotely survivable, and, down the line, lets Gear 5 not just instantly liquefy him. So no, the time skip isn't about Luffy becoming a grimdark protagonist. It's about him quietly weaponizing his happiness so he never has to watch another brother die for his dream. And that's the real secret. All that off-screen refinement of body, of hockey, of how he carries grief, is exactly what makes the sudden Nika awakening feel less like a random patch and more like a power that's been slowly logging in for 2 years. We'll talk about that login screen next. The Romance Dawn prototypes, 3 Luffys, walk into a story. So when we say the Nika power has been logging in for years, we also have to admit something mildly cursed. The Luffy you love is literally Luffy 3.0. The first 2 versions are hiding in plain sight under the exact same title, Romance Dawn.
Here's an interesting thing. Romance Dawn version 1 and version 2 aren't just rough sketches. They're full one-shots Oda published in 1996 in Weekly Shonen Jump and 1996-97 in a special issue right before One Piece actually launches. Same name, same straw hat, same stretchy kid, completely different vibes. They're like alternate universe pilots, where Oda is still asking, okay, what even is this guy? Prototype Luffy number 1 is almost unsettling if you're used to East Blue Luffy. He's still a rubber man, still goofy, but his relationship to pirates is framed way darker. He's more of a wandering weirdo in a world that hates pirates, raised by this grandpa marine type who's even stricter than Canon Garp. He'll crack a joke, but the jokes are a bit meaner, more pointed, like early Oda hasn't sanded off the sharp edges yet. His dream? It's not Pirate King as a clear system goal. It's framed as this vague idea of the freest man on the sea. Almost like Oda knows the destination, but hasn't found the iconic phrasing. You can feel him circling the concept without quite nailing the catchphrase. Then Prototype Luffy number 2 shows up, and Oda just hits shuffle on the whole world. The devil fruit is the balloon fruit, not Gomu Gomu. The power is more about inflating than clean rubber logic, which would have made later combat a complete mess. The Shanks analogue is a different redhead pirate with a slightly more generic mentor energy. And to be fair, you immediately miss the specific Shanks-Roger-Joy Boy chain we eventually get. This Luffy is louder, even more of a cheerful outlaw, almost bragging about being a pirate the way a kid brags about being a delinquent at school. You can see Oda stress-testing how reckless can he be before you stop rooting for him. And yet, across all 3 Luffys, the bedrock is already there. He's stupid and clear at the same time. Can't do math, instantly reads people. He's obsessed with radical freedom, no interest in money, status or rules, only in going where he wants. And he absolutely refuses to compromise on friends. Even in the prototypes, he's ready to throw hands with anyone who treats people like property. I want to emphasize that this is the real constant character system, not the hat, not the exact fruit name. Some discarded traits would have quietly downgraded him. The slightly more mean-spirited teasing, the balloon naming, the less mythic mentor, all of that pulls him closer to random 90s gag hero and farther from iconic, sun-brained idiot messiah. People say Oda planned Luffy perfectly from day one, to which I say, mate, we have the drafts. And because as far as archetypes go, these drafts are doing something wild.
Even before Nika, they accidentally line Luffy up with an ancient trickster hero template.
Next, we're going to dig into why this rubber kid looks suspiciously like a modern Sun Wukong wearing a straw hat. From Balloon Boy to Sun God, prototype powers, and the Nika shadow. So when people say Gear 5 came out of nowhere, like Oda just woke up one day and invented Toon Force Jesus, to which I say, mate, go back to Romance Dawn. The prototype Luffy is already a walking physics violation. The names change, the lore isn't Nika yet, but the core idea? It's sitting right there making fart noise sound effects. In the first Romance Dawn one-shot, Luffy doesn't have the Gomu Gomu no Mi as we know it. He has this balloon/balloon style ability tied to a cursed fruit and a weird bird, and his big move is literally inflating himself with air. Not stretching a limb to punch someone from far away, just full-on pufferfish mode. He swallows air, his body balloons out, and he weaponizes that inflation. It's less elastic martial artist and more living whoopee cushion with combat applications, which is a sentence I wish I didn't have to say out loud. Here's an interesting thing. That early balloon power is already playing with air, pressure, and cartoon silhouettes way harder than early East Blue Luffy ever did. Canon Gomu Gomu starts as a pretty grounded system. He stretches, he ricochets, he slingshots. It's goofy, sure, but you can kind of fake a physics explanation in your head. Romance Dawn Luffy, by contrast, is inflating, deflating, and turning into a literal sphere. He's a gag panel before he's a fighter.
And to be fair, that's exactly where Gear 5 ends up. People look at Nika Luffy bouncing around, eyes bugging out, limbs snapping back with sound effects, and go, wow, this is so different. Because as far as tone goes, yeah, it's a massive shift from Marineford trauma, but mechanically, it's just Oda finally letting the balloon version off the leash. The body is rubber, but the logic is Looney Tunes. Walls bend, ground turns to rubber, Luffy inflates other people. That's not a new power. That's the early balloon gag escalated to a metaphysical level. Visually, Oda has been obsessed with this from day one. Exaggerated silhouettes when he puffs up. Deflation gags where he flies around the panel, like a sad balloon losing air.
Enemies getting disarmed, not just by damage, but by how stupid he looks while doing it. That's the prototype of Nika's warrior of liberation vibe. You don't just beat the oppressor, you humiliate the whole system by refusing to play serious in a world that demands seriousness. I want to emphasize an obscure meta layer here. Oda has said multiple times that he wanted a funny main character whose body could basically do anything for jokes, that he chose rubber because it gave him unlimited comedic poses. Later, when the Gorosei call Nika the most ridiculous power in the world, that's not a retcon accident. That's Oda finally naming the exact thing he's been chasing since Balloon Boy. The idea that joy and absurdity themselves are a weapon. So no, the Nika shadow doesn't suddenly appear in Wano. It's flickering behind those early drafts, in every balloon, every dumb face, every moment where laughter breaks tension. And this isn't just random comedy either. Next, we're going to plug Luffy into a much older Japanese tradition of trickster heroes. and ask why our rubber idiot keeps lining up with Sun Wukong and other sun-soaked mischief gods pretending to be pirates. Luffy versus Sun Wukong, the Monkey King Oda never names. So here's the heretical take. Luffy is less based on actual pirates and more on a mythical monkey who once rage-quit heaven. Like the King of the Pirates job title is basically a cosplay wig thrown on top of a Sun Wukong core. Let's outline that core really fast. Sun Wukong is the original problem child. A rebellious monkey born from stone, immortal-ish because he cheats death paperwork, staff-wielding, cloud-riding, and a full-time trickster who literally storms heaven, beats up gods, and then gets punished, recruited, and weaponized by a higher power. Sound vaguely familiar yet? Because as far as parallels go, Oda is not being subtle. He's just being Japanese about it. We've got Monkey D. Luffy, actual monkey motif right in the name, who spends the whole series defying a celestial order. The world government sits in Marijois like a fake Mount Olympus, and Luffy's response is to punch a celestial dragon so hard the entire power system of the world has to react. Wukong smacks heavenly bureaucrats. Luffy smacks space nobles in fish bowls.
Same energy, different dress code. Luffy's resilience is also straight out of "you really should be dead" mythology. Sun Wukong survives being baked in a furnace, crushed under a mountain, executed multiple times. Luffy gets lightning, poison, impalement, Magellan, Lucci, Kaido, and still bounces back like the universe is soft-locked into letting him live. And to be fair, the fighting style is the same chaotic blend of gag and annihilation. Wukong clowning enemies with transformations and staff tricks, Luffy turning into a balloon, getting stuck in buildings, then casually one-shotting people with a punch that rearranges city blocks. Here's an interesting thing. Visually, Oda keeps framing Luffy like a mortal challenging gods.
Punching a celestial dragon is basically assaulting heaven. Storming Eni's lobby to burn the flag is a formal declaration of war on the divine order. Ringing the ox bell at Marineford is literally an echo of mythic bells announcing cosmic shifts. And then you have him laughing in the face of execution at Logtown and Marineford, echoing Wukong smirking while heaven piles punishments on his head. Gear 4 just cranks the Monkey King slider to max. The cloud-like steam halo, the bouncing, the airborne brawler style where he ricochets through the sky like a rubber thundercloud? That's Wukong's cloud-riding acrobatics, remixed into a cartoon boxing match. He's not just flying, he's playing in the air, like gravity is a suggestion he's politely declining.
Oda has never come out and said, "Yeah, Sun Wukong," to which I say, he doesn't need to. Japanese readers grow up swimming in Journey to the West references. They see monkey, staff-like stretching limbs, rebellion against heaven, and connect the dots. I want to emphasize that the homage actually works better as subtext than as a direct shout-out, because it lets Luffy be an archetype, not a parody. And once you stack Monkey King energy on top of the Nika reveal, it gets wild. We're not just dealing with a prankster anymore. We're dealing with a sun deity of liberation whose chosen form is a laughing monkey pirate. Half trickster, half savior, a god whose miracles look like jokes.
Which raises the next question. If Luffy is this hybrid myth, what does that say about the drums of liberation and the kind of god the One Piece world is secretly begging for? Nika, Joy Boy, and the sun motif Luffy never asked for. So now we've got this laughing sun god clowning on Kaido, and people love to say, Luffy was secretly Nika all along. To which I say, sure, and I was secretly training Future Sight while binge reading SBS. What actually matters is how the story drags this dude who just wants meat and freedom into a multi-century prophecy he never signed up for. Here's an interesting thing. In story, Nika is barely a character. He's a silhouette, a drumbeat, a rumor about a legendary liberator whose very existence makes slaves smile. Joy Boy? Same deal. A failed promise to Fishman Island, an apology on a poneglyph, and this vague, tragic idea of someone who tried to free the world and didn't quite make it. That's it. No stat block, no move list, just a will that refuses to die. And yet, visually, Oda has been drawing Luffy like a tiny sun since Chapter 1. The Straw Hat's circular silhouette blocking the sky over Kobe. The way Oda keeps using sunrise panels whenever Luffy sets off. Leaving Dawn Island, declaring he'll be king of the pirates, sailing from Arabasta. The logo itself, giant yellow sun behind the Jolly Roger. Because as far as subconscious branding goes, Oda basically slapped solar energy mascot on this kid from day one. If you dig into color spreads, it gets worse. There's that spread where the crew's on a beach and the sky has these radiating lines, literally framing Luffy at the center like a sunburst. Another with circus imagery, where the spotlight circle around him is drawn with the same rays. Databooks and SBS answers quietly join in. Luffy loves clear, sunny weather. His favorite color combo is red and yellow. He's described as bright or radiant in those little author blurbs. None of this screams secret god, but it does scream, this guy is the light source. Then Wano drops the bomb. Gomu Gomu no Mi was never real. It's Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika. Suddenly every goofy rubber gag retroactively becomes the world's most powerful coping mechanism. The whole system recontextualizes itself. The government didn't just fear a strong fruit, they were literally trying to keep the sun from rising again. All those coincidences where Luffy shows up exactly when people lose hope, the narrative starts acting like the planet itself is holding its breath, waiting for this specific brand of chaos to reappear. And I want to emphasize the tension here. Luffy's motivation is caveman simple. Be free, find One Piece, have fun with his friends. Nika/Joy Boy expectations are cosmic. Liberate the oppressed, finish an 800-year-old promise, possibly reboot the entire power structure of the sea. The drama of the endgame isn't, can Luffy become Joy Boy? It's, can the world's messianic fantasies survive contact with a guy who refuses to be anything but himself? Oda has said he's known the ending for Luffy from very early on, back in the Romance Dawn era. And, to be fair, the sun motif feels baked in long before the word Nika ever appears. The real trick is how even Luffy's dumbest,
goofiest moments are quietly becoming holy memories inside characters' heads. And that's where this accidental sun god starts warping the world in ways he'll probably never notice. Shanks, Roger, Joy Boy. The lineage Luffy pretends not to care about. Luffy is the only character in the series actually qualified to be Joy Boy precisely because he does not want to be Joy Boy.
Everyone else is treating this like a cosmic job interview, and he's the guy who didn't read the email and still somehow shows up perfectly dressed. To see why that works, we have to walk the Shanks-Roger relay race. Shanks is literally Roger's cabin boy, the kid who watched the Pirate King laugh at the final island, inherit that iconic straw hat, and then just sit on it for years. The Vivre card notes that Shanks treasured Roger's hat as a symbol of an era, which sounds grand, but here's an interesting thing. He then hands that same symbol to a random rubber child in East Blue as a promise, and quietly as a test. Give this back when you're a great pirate. That's not just sentiment. That's Shanks saying, let's see if you can carry the same weight my captain did without breaking. Roger's whole deal at Laugh-Tale is one giant, too early joke. He reaches the end, learns about Joy Boy, the Void Century, the true history, and instead of solemnly vowing to correct the world, he laughs. Databook profiles describe him as someone who laughed loudly even at his own execution, which, to be fair, is insane behavior. But that laugh is the same energy as Luffy giggling before punching a celestial dragon. Roger realizes he can't be Joy Boy, can't pull the trigger yet, so he throws the era forward. Find it if you can, he tells the next generation.
Shanks hears that, then decades later bets everything on Luffy, the kid who repeats Roger's words almost verbatim without ever hearing them. So you get this chain of almosts and maybes. Joy Boy fails his ancient promise. Roger is too early. Shanks is the caretaker. Luffy is the one who doesn't even care there's a chain. People tell him he's special, and he treats it like background noise. His bounty spikes? He ignores the number and only checks the drawing. The Will of D comes up as this terrifying storm in history, and he's like, cool letter, anyway, I'm hungry. He gets labeled a Yonko and acts like someone accidentally upgraded his gym membership, because as far as Luffy's concerned, titles are just a mess adults use to avoid saying what they actually want.
Even the obscure material backs this up. A Vivre card points out that Shanks took an unusual interest in Luffy from the moment he saw his fearless grin, explicitly comparing it to Roger's. Another databook note about Roger calls him carefree to the point of recklessness, yet strangely trusted by those around him, which is just Luffy with a moustache. I want to emphasize how boring this would be if Luffy leaned into the prophecy. Imagine him brooding about Joy Boy like a discount isekai protagonist. Nobody wants that. Instead, we get the anti-chosen one, the guy who only fits the myth because he refuses to live for it.
And that's exactly the kind of protagonist you need if you're Oda, sitting on a planned ending for decades, trying to land a story about freedom without turning it into homework. The real question is, what does an ending look like when your main character keeps rejecting every crown the world tries to glue to his head? We'll get there. The rubber brain. Why Luffy's stupidity is a weapon. So when we ask what an ending looks like for a guy who keeps rejecting every crown, the rude answer is, it looks like nothing, because the crown just slides off his empty head. Luffy's greatest power is not rubber, not hockey, not mythical sun god retcons. It's that he is literally too stupid to be controlled. People love to post the Luffy IQ compilation clips, right?
Mixing up people's names, confidently calling Kinemon Ken for like 50 chapters, forgetting entire battle plans 10 seconds after they're explained, misreading the most obvious death flags. And, to be fair, he really is clueless about a lot. This is the guy who thought Nico Robin the assassin was a perfectly safe person to invite on board, who walked into Eni's lobby like it was a theme park, and who hears Yonko and reacts like you just told him about a new flavor of meat. But here's an interesting thing. That idiocy is weirdly consistent. Luffy is not randomly dumb, he's selectively dumb. His brain is a brutal filter. The world gets sorted into like 4 folders: friends, enemies, food, freedom. Everything else? Trash bin. Political nuance, propaganda, complex marine rankings, the economic system of Wano. Gone. Because, as far as Luffy is concerned, if it doesn't affect his friends, his stomach, or his ability to sail where he wants, it's irrelevant data. That's funny, but it's also armor. Psychological manipulation relies on you caring about status, shame, reputation, fear, despair. Luffy just doesn't download those files. Threats? He shrugs them off. Insults? He barely hears them. When Bellamy mocks dreams in Jaya, Luffy's response is not an argument, it's a punch, and then silence. When Enel does his whole "I am God" speech, Luffy's like, "Cool, I'm rubber," and proceeds to beat him like a broken appliance. You cannot gaslight a man whose brain is physically incapable of storing your gas. Marineford should have broken him permanently. Public execution, global broadcast, the whole world watching his failure. For most shonen protagonists, that's a multi-arc depression. Luffy absolutely collapses. And I want to emphasize that the story lets him grieve. But then that rubber brain kicks in. The trauma doesn't calcify into self-hatred, it bounces into a new directive. Get stronger. Protect everyone next time. It's not that he's deep and processed his emotions perfectly. He just reassigns the pain into the future punch things harder folder. Oda even leans into this in SBS jokes, saying Luffy's brain might be rubber too. That's not just a gag, it's the metaphor. Rubber doesn't break under pressure, it stretches and snaps back. That's why despair-based tactics keep failing. Doflamingo tries to turn Dressrosa into a theatre of hopelessness. Kaido tries to drown Wano in generational trauma. And Luffy treats both like really annoying waiting rooms before his next fight. People sometimes ask how his Conqueror's Haki and Nika awakening feels so instinctive, so unburdened by doubt. To which I say, what doubt? The man has never overthought anything in his life. His mind is empty enough that when a sun god drumbeat needs a host, it finds nothing in the way. And that's where we're headed next. If Luffy's brain is this elastic, what happens when you plug that into the most over-engineered power system in the series? Obscure Biology 2. Immunities, poisons, and the Luffy immune system. So if Luffy's brain is a perfect empty hard drive for God software, His body is the bugged hardware that somehow runs every cursed program without crashing. We talked about his blood hacks and bone balloons already, but that was the warm-up. Because as far as biology goes, Luffy stops being a guy and starts being a narrative exploit the moment you look at his immunities. Think about what's already normal for him. He can pump his blood like a human pressure washer without stroking out. He inflates his bones in gear third, walks around with kaiju hands, and then just deflates into chibi mode as a side effect. That alone should land him in a medical journal titled, "Do Not Try This." And then Oda stacks on Crocodile's dehydration, Enel's lightning, Magellan's poison, Caesar's gas, and says, yeah, this same clown survives all of that too. Here's an interesting thing. Crocodile literally mummifies people. We see it. One touch and they're raisins. Luffy gets grabbed, loses a ton of water, face caves in, and he's fine after some rain and meat. Caesar floods Punk Hazard with a nerve gas that wipes out whole squads. Luffy breathes it, gets knocked out, and walks it off like a bad nap. The series keeps quietly telling you, this isn't a normal human baseline anymore. And to be fair, we just nod and accept it because funny rubber man. Impel Down is where the joke almost stops.
Magellan's Hydra is explicitly described as lethal. Prisoners die just from splashes. Luffy gets covered, his organs are melting, and Oda goes out of his way to show him screaming, convulsing, literally on a ticking clock. Ivankov's healing is basically slam his immune system with hormone steroids, force his metabolism to go nuclear, and hope his will to live is insane enough to not burn out. Ivankov even says a normal person would die instantly. The implication is wild. Luffy's body plus his stubbornness produce an immune response that shouldn't exist. Oda kind of leans into this in SBS and databook bits. We get those jokes about Luffy's rubber body messing with how he processes alcohol, how he ages slower in appearance, how his recovery speed is absurd. There's this vague running gag that he's human on paper, but the author has quietly checked the other box in his head. I want to emphasize that. Oda keeps the label, changes the contents. So how does rubber even interact with all this? Real rubber doesn't block poison, but in Oda's cartoon logic, rubber is this catch-all insulator. It shrugs off electricity. It cushions blunt trauma. It stretches around bullets. Once you accept that, it's not a huge leap to say his organs bounce back from damage, or that toxins have a harder time shredding tissues that behave like elastic. It's fake science, but internally consistent fake science. People will say, that's just plot armor, to which I say, yes, and also theme armor.
Luffy is the guy who eats the world's poisons, Magellan's, Caesar's, the celestial dragon's cruelty, the despair of places like Drum and Wano, and refuses to stay contaminated. He metabolizes it into more freedom. His immunity isn't just durability. It's a statement that this is the one body the era's toxins can't permanently corrupt. And we haven't even hit the ceiling yet. All of this biological nonsense is still Luffy pretending to be a living organism. With Gear 5, the body stops playing by any rules at all and starts doing something much dumber and way more dangerous. It treats reality itself like rubber. Luffy's off-panel empire. The people who changed because he passed through.
If Gear 5 is Luffy breaking physics on panel, then his real broken ability is off panel. He rewrites people's lives, and we only get the patch notes in cover stories and Vivre cards. The actual legend of Luffy is hiding in the margins you probably skim, because as far as Oda is concerned, the main story is just one camera angle. The cover stories are this second, jankier camera, where we check back in on the NPCs Luffy emotionally speedran. Kobe and Helmeppo are the template. Luffy punches a corrupt Marine captain, screams at Kobe to chase his dream, and pieces out.
Months later, the cover serial quietly shows these two clowns training under Garp, getting stronger, getting humbled, and kind of becoming the Marine version of Luffy and Zoro. We don't see Luffy for a single panel, but his gravity is in every page. Here's an interesting thing. That same pattern is how Hachi's entire redemption arc sneaks up on you. In Arlong Park, he's a gag octopus henchman with swords for arms. Then, in the cover story Hachan's Seafloor Stroll, he escapes, opens a takoyaki stand, befriends Kami and Papag, and slowly becomes this lovable himbo. So when he appears at Sabaody to save the Straw Hats, it feels random if you only read the volumes. With the cover story context, it's Luffy's earlier choice to topple Arlong, echoing years later, literally dragging a former enemy into the people worth saving category. And to be fair, it's not just the big names. The databooks and Vivre cards are full of tiny patch notes like, "This guy reformed and became a carpenter," or "This island's monarchy stabilized after the Straw Hats left." Miss Valentine and Mr. 5? They end up running a security company. Wapol, the human trash fire of Drum, becomes a toy magnate, and somehow a king again. Even those random kids in Syrup Village grow up playing pirate because a rubber idiot in a straw hat briefly docked there and made piracy look like the ultimate freedom system. People inside the story talk about that. We see bounty posters passed around bars, kids pretending to be Luffy, the way kids in our world pretend to be superheroes. Rumors spread of a reckless pirate who topples governments and then doesn't stick around to rule. To which I say, that's basically the textbook definition of a myth. A guy who shows up, breaks the status quo, and vanishes before the paperwork. I want to emphasize how sneaky this is. Oda is growing Luffy's legend in negative space. Every off-panel promotion Kobe gets, every island that keeps a Straw Hat flag as a symbol, is world-building interest on that initial Luffy investment. By the time we hit the dawn of the world, you're not rallying a cold audience.
You're lighting a match in a world that's already been primed by a decade of rumors about a laughing rubber man who makes impossible things feel briefly, tangibly real. And that's why the next step isn't just stronger punches. It's what kind of myth you build when reality itself starts to bend around you. The quiet bonds, Luffy's strangest friendships and non-relationships. And part of that bending reality is social, not just physics. Luffy walks through this world like a rubber wrecking ball, and behind him is a trail of people who either love him, hate him, or can't decide which. But all of them are stuck thinking about him way more than he ever thinks about them. Take the weirdly powerful bonds that come from one impulsive decision. Bon Clay starts as a gag villain, does the swan ballet, everyone laughs. And then Luffy does the simplest thing possible. He calls him a friend and refuses to abandon him. That's it. No speech about justice, no ideology. And that tiny, dumb, heartfelt choice mutates into Bon Clay, literally sacrificing his freedom in Impel Down. Still cheering for Luffy years later, in cover stories like he's subscribed to the Luffy newsletter for life. Boa Hancock is the same power system in a different costume.
Luffy barges into Amazon Lily, sees the most feared woman in the world, and goes, "You're kind of annoying, but you helped me, so I like you." Accidentally rejects her goddess-tier beauty, eats meat, punches a celestial dragon, and suddenly the pirate empress is a giggling teenager whose entire political stance becomes, "Protect that rubber idiot." To which I say, this is the most efficient diplomacy in the series. Vivi and Kobe are the quieter versions. Saving Kobe in Chapter 1 is such a throwaway shonen move that you probably didn't think about it at the time, but Oda did. That one punch at Alvida turns into Kobe's whole career, his haki bloom, his role in Sword. The Vivre card literally notes that Kobe's ideal of justice is shaped around Luffy.
Same with Vivi. She leaves the crew, but Vivre card and SBS notes keep stressing how she follows Luffy's exploits, crying and laughing from Alabasta like a long-distance straw hat. And here's an interesting thing. Even the joke encounters echo. Freeing Hatchin in Arlong Park looks like standard Luffy doesn't overthink prisoners. That ripples into Sabayori, where Hachi's connection to Kami and Rayleigh is what even gets the Straw Hats into that auction in the first place. Sparing Foxy. That clown keeps popping up in cover stories, interacting with people tied to the New World mess. Buggy is the apex of this. Luffy just doesn't kill him. Treats him like a mildly annoying balloon. Years later, that non-relationship helps manufacture an emperor.
I want to emphasize how asymmetrical all of this is. Luffy has these non-relationships where Smoker is building his entire career around chasing this kid. Bartolomeo is literally running a Straw Hat cult. And Luffy is out here going, "Smoke guy? Barrier dude?" He can't remember their names, but he still inspires them, because as far as he's concerned, people are either fun, boring, or enemies of his friends. SBS and Vivre card entries quietly weaponize that simplicity. You get random notes like, X character still admires Luffy, or Y is training harder after hearing about his feats. And it paints this picture that Luffy lives rent-free in half the planet's brain. Meanwhile, he's just asking what's for dinner. And to be fair, that's the secret. He refuses to categorize beyond "I like you" or "I don't like you." And the world keeps trying to turn that into politics, romance, ideology. That gap between his simple intent and their complex reaction is where the comedy lives, but also the loyalty, the revolutions, the coups, which is where we loop back to power. At some point, Oda just goes, "Okay, this social gravity, that's a literal aura now." The same kid who casually befriends swan men and future emperors starts knocking people out by existing. Next, we need to talk about how that vague, messy, "I do what I want" energy crystallizes into Conqueror's haki, and why the universe keeps treating him like a king, even when he's still just yelling about meat. Meta Luffy. Oda's planned ending
and the boy who can't grow up. But here's the cursed take. Luffy might be the only shonen protagonist whose own author is actively nerfing his character development. Everyone else gets maturity and growth arcs. Luffy gets a bigger punch and the same brain. And to be fair, that's not a bug in Oda's writing, that's literally the endgame plan. Oda's been weirdly open about this. In multiple interviews, he's said he had the final scene in mind from very early on, back in the Romance Dawn era, when Luffy was still a prototype with a gun and a vaguely cursed fruit. The details of the power system, the Void Century, even Nika, those could shift. But the condition for reaching that ending was always Luffy's essence can't change. We can stack lore until the series collapses under its own weight. The kid in the straw hat still has to react like the same idiot from Chapter 1. Here's an interesting thing. Oda hates aging Luffy up. He said he doesn't want Luffy to become cool or mature in the conventional sense, because as far as he's concerned, Luffy is pure, weaponized childhood. That's why the time skip gives everyone else glow-ups and trauma haircuts, while Luffy shows up like, I learned to punch harder, and I'm still hungry. People ask, when will he act like a real captain? To which I say, never. And that's the point. Oda's also outright stated that he wants readers to feel like kids again when they read One Piece. That's the mission statement. Luffy is the avatar of that feeling. He laughs at danger, believes strangers instantly, and treats world-shaking history the same way you treat a random side quest in an RPG. The story can talk about genocide and lost kingdoms, but the emotional poove is still, wow, big robot, cool. This creates a really funny tension with the increasingly heavy meta lore. We've got the Void Century, Nika, Joy Boy, ancient weapons, global conspiracies, and Luffy's contribution is usually, are my friends okay? Oda balances the mess by deliberately keeping Luffy's reactions simple. Gear 5 is literally a cartoon god of liberation, but Luffy uses it to bounce around, make goofy faces, and smack Kaido like a Looney Tunes gag. The universe is begging him to be a myth, and he keeps choosing to be a joke. I want to emphasize that's probably the core of the planned ending. The world expects a king of the pirates to be a conqueror, a tyrant, or at least a dignified legend. Luffy will get the title and then refuse to play the role. He won't centralize power, he'll break it. And when we finally reach the One Piece, Oda's already said it will be something that makes the crew laugh. Not a solemn revelation, not a tragic sacrifice. A punchline. The last beat of a 1,000-plus chapter epic is Luffy laughing like a kid again. Which raises the real question. What kind of treasure could justify that much setup and still land as a joke? Next, we need to talk about the actual meta-theories around what the One Piece is and how Oda's hints quietly rule out half the fanbase's favorite ideas. The drumbeat of freedom. Why Luffy fights like a festival. And that laugh at the end? That's not just a punchline, that's percussion. Because as far as the story is concerned, Luffy doesn't just find the treasure, he brings the band. The moment Oda rips the curtain off is Wano, Gear 5, the so-called Drums of Liberation. The anime literally cuts the background music and replaces it with that goofy hypnotic beat, dom-da-da-dom, like a festival taiko played by a god who pre-gamed too hard. The narration calls it a rhythm spreading across the world, not a scary war drum, but something joyful.
People online were like, "Why does this sound like party music during an execution?" To which I say, yes, exactly. That's the point. Because here's an interesting thing. This rhythm didn't come out of nowhere. One Piece has been ending arcs like a village Matsuri since East Blue. Arlong Park, bonfires, meat, Nama crying and then laughing while everyone drinks around Luffy. Alabista, fireworks, dancing, an entire kingdom partying while the Straw Hats eat on the fringes. Skypiea is literally a sky rave with drums and dancing around a bonfire. And who's at the center, shoveling food like a black hole in a straw hat? It's always Luffy, sitting exactly where the music is loudest. Even the smaller arcs do it.
Whiskey Peak's "we're actually bounty hunters" twist immediately dissolves into a hangover party. Thriller Bark ends with a concert. Fishman Island closes on a literal royal ball. The war ends, the feast begins, and Luffy is the gravitational center of both. Oda keeps training you to associate Luffy present with "this battlefield will be a dance floor in about 3 chapters." And to be fair, his fighting already looks like choreography. Gomu Gomu no Gatling is just him turning someone into a drum by punching on beat. Gear 2 has that bouncing, springy footwork. Gear 4 is him ricocheting around like a balloon at a rave. Half his attacks look less like martial arts and more like a drunk festival performer who somehow has perfect timing.
He literally names moves after party tricks. Fireworks, UFO, whip. You can almost count the tempo in your head when he goes off. Oda has admitted in SPS and in early art book comments that he wants battles to feel fun and like a show, not grim military encounters. I want to emphasize this. He's said he draws fights while imagining sound effects as music. That's why Luffy is always grinning mid-fight, even when he's half dead. It's not just he's brave. The guy is vibing. The battlefield is his stage. So when the story finally names it Drums of Liberation, that's not a new power. That's the reveal of a long-running motif. Nika, Joy Boy, Luffy, they all share one job: turn war zones into festivals. His power as the sun god isn't just to punch harder. It's to overwrite the atmosphere. People start laughing. Soldiers dance on the edge of death. Even Kaido can't help but smirk at how stupidly fun this fight is. And that festival energy quietly feeds into his conqueror's haki and Nika aura. It's not just fear that makes people kneel, it's the overwhelming urge to join the party. The line between a Luffy feast and a Luffy boss fight is way thinner than it looks. And next, we need to dig into how that contagious joy rewires entire countries long after he sails away. The Sun Hat. Why, that straw hat is basically a halo. So if Luffy turns battlefields into festivals, what's the centerpiece of the party? Bold claim time. The most important ancient weapon-looking object we've seen so far might actually be a hat. Look at that thing. Visually, the straw hat is absurdly simple: wide circular brim, tight little crown, one band. but because as far as manga composition goes, that's a perfect mini-sun. Oda constantly draws it as a flat ring around Luffy's head, or silhouettes Luffy so the brim glows like a halo. Half the time, if you blacked out his face and left only the outline, you'd think you were looking at some sun god icon instead of a guy who forgets what north is. And here's an interesting thing. This goofy sun halo has a lineage that's way too serious. We know it sat on Roger's head, then on Shanks, then on Luffy. That's already insane because that's basically a relay race of Pirate King candidates. But then the story quietly drops Mary Joyce's secret freezer room with a giant straw hat preserved like a national relic. Suddenly, this isn't just a sentimental keepsake. It's a repeating symbol across centuries, treated like an artifact on par with the world's greatest taboo history. People sometimes say it's just Luffy's trademark design, to which I say Oda is way too much of a gremlin planner for that. In art books, he's talked about how annoying it is to keep the hat visible in every panel, how he has to cheat perspective so it doesn't vanish behind shoulders or speech bubbles. In SBS, he jokes that if Luffy ever truly lost the hat, the series would just end because the logo wouldn't make sense anymore.
It's comedy, but it's also Oda basically admitting this object is structurally glued to the story. I want to emphasize how often Oda composes the sun directly behind Luffy's head. Think of Marineford, the shadowed hat hiding his eyes as he screams for Ace. Think of Skypiea, Luffy ringing the bell with the sun blazing behind him. Even in Wano, Gear 5 Luffy with that floppy, almost cloud-like hat brim reads like a literal solar corona. The hat crowns him without anyone needing to kneel. And to be fair, the hat is both promise and curse. It's Shanks's bet, Roger's ghost, Joy Boy's echo, all crammed into one fashion accessory that Luffy treats like a slightly fragile frisbee. That casualness is the point. Any other character would turn it into a destiny monologue. Luffy just says, "I'll give it back when I'm Pirate King," and then spends the rest of the series almost losing it to birds, whirlpools, and sheer stupidity. The will is inherited, but the weight doesn't crush him, because he refuses to treat it like a chain. Which brings us back to that giant straw hat in Marie-Joie. Combined with Nika, sun drums, and ancient sun worship, it starts to feel like Luffy didn't pick an outfit. He accidentally put on a cosmic job uniform. If the next big reveal is that this simple hat is keyed to Joy Boy's role itself, then the real question becomes, what happens when the halo finally burns the world government instead of just shading Luffy's eyes? What Pirate King really means to Luffy, and why One Piece is almost secondary. So when people say Luffy wants to be Pirate King because he wants One Piece, to which I say, no, you've actually inverted the entire series. The treasure is the side quest. The title is the clickbait. The real video is freedom. We have Luffy's own canon definition, which the anime practically highlights in neon. The Pirate King is the freest person on the sea. Not the strongest, not the richest, not CEO of Pirate Incorporated. Meanwhile, everyone else treats the title like a power ranking. Crocodile wants an ancient weapon. Doflamingo wants the underground throne. Big Mom wants a political utopia where she's the dictator mom. Even Blackbeard frames it as ultimate control.
And Luffy hears all that and goes, "Cool, I'm gonna eat meat and punch a dragon." Here's an interesting thing. If you track his behavior, he consistently forgets to care about treasure. In Skypiea, they get literal mountains of gold, and he tries to ring a bell instead. In Jaya, Bellamy mocks the very idea of sky treasure, and Luffy's more offended at the mockery than the money. In Fishman Island, he declares war on Big Mom and casually throws away her candy tribute. But he's not running numbers on territory or Yonko economics. Because as far as Luffy's concerned, the journey condition of "I do whatever I want with my friends" is the real prize. Vivre Card and SBS Bits quietly back this up.
Oda straight up jokes that Luffy can't save money, can't plan ahead, and would lose a strategy meeting to a rock. His future plans section is basically blank. He's structurally incapable of being a conventional conqueror. You cannot have a long-term imperialist agenda when your brain's operating system is see friend, help friend, see meat, eat meat. And to be fair, that's not a bug, it's the point. Look at the Shanks-Roger-Luffy pipeline. Shanks laughs off the idea of chasing One Piece for status. He hands over the hat and basically says, "Show me something fun." Roger reaches Laugh-Tale, sees the treasure, learns the Void Century truth, and what does he do? He laughs. The so-called greatest revelation in the world, and his response is the same vibe as Luffy reading a gag manga.
That's not a man obsessed with owning a chest. That's someone vibing with a world view. Oda's even told us in SBS that Luffy was built to be pure freedom as a character, and his Nika form hammers that home. Sun God, drums of liberation, rubber body that literally rejects conventional damage rules. It's like the universe itself bends so he can keep moving. The system keeps saying, "No, you can't do that," and his biology answers, "Watch me." So if Pirate King just means freedom maxed, what happens the day after he gets it? Does Luffy retire, ascend, or break the world's rules one last time? I want to emphasize this. Oda has dropped weird little hints about Luffy's final scene that might mean the real ending isn't the crown. It's what he walks away from it to do next.
The unchanging core, Luffy's moral code from East Blue to Egghead. So when people say, "Luffy changed the world the moment the drum started," to which I say, mate, he was already breaking the world back when his greatest technique was pistol but made of stupid. The Nika reveal feels huge, but if you actually track his choices from East Blue to Egghead, the moral software has never been patched. We just keep adding cursed DLC on top. Think about Arlong Park. The world's politics don't matter. The racial history doesn't matter. The bounty system doesn't matter. Nami cries. Luffy puts the hat on her head, walks forward, and demolishes the guy who turned her life into a cage. Fast forward to Sabaody. Celestial dragons, the literal apex of the world hierarchy, walk around with human beings on leashes. Luffy doesn't give a single lecture on oppression theory. He just sees Hachi get shot, says, "That pissed me off," and punches a god in the face. Same pattern at Enies Lobby. He doesn't care what the world government stands for. He cares that they stole Robin and built a courthouse as a glorified execution stage. So he declares war with a flag and a fire arrow. And to be fair, the series keeps trying to drag him into capital H history. Dressrosa's toys, Wano's samurai, Egghead's future slaves, everyone projecting savior, messiah, joy boy onto this dude. Luffy's response is aggressively low resolution. I want to eat with that guy again. That country looks fun. That guy's crying. It sounds childish, but because as far as the narrative is concerned, that's the whole point. He's the one person who refuses to speak in ideology and only speaks in immediate human stakes. Here's an interesting thing. Even when he's not on screen, the same contagion of freedom is happening. Look at the cover stories. The Buggy and Alvida remnant chaos, the way the Drum Kingdom modernizes after he topples Wapol, the little revolutions that spark in places like Arabasta or the Goa Kingdom once someone has seen a rubber idiot laugh in front of a cannon. Half the time Luffy has already sailed away, but people who met him once start rebelling, quitting the Marines, or founding pirate crews.
The world government calls him dangerous long before Nika because his presence breaks the mental system people live under. His treatment of enemies is just as consistent. He forgives Bon Clay, Jinbei, even Law's crew of former villains, because their intent bends toward protecting friends and the innocent. He utterly annihilates Crocodile, Enel, Doflamingo, Kaido's regime, not because of rank or race, but because they treat people as disposable props. The sliding scale is simple. How did you treat my friends? And how do you treat people who can't fight back? You can be a fishman, a cyborg, a god, a yonko. If you pass that test, you get a seat at the table. If you fail, you get Gatling through the floor.
Strip away the sun god label, the gear inflation, the retroactive Joy Boy lineage, and what's left is the same idiot in a straw hat who wants a big feast and 0 cages. I want to emphasize that as we move into the final synthesis, we're not asking, who is Nika really, so much as what happens to a world when this one specific brand of stupidity wins. Because if you erase every lore twist, the ending Oda's been telegraphing is just, what if that kid's way of living actually becomes the dominant idea on the sea? From prototype punk to sun god captain, the full evolution of Luffy. So when people say, Luffy only got interesting once he became the sun god, to which I say, my friend, you are a rushed system.
Because as far as Oda's planning goes, Luffy has been basically the same chaos gremlin since before One Piece even existed. Let's rewind to the Romance Dawn prototypes. Early Luffy is already this carefree, stretchy, oddly inspiring idiot who walks into people's trauma like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet and just fixes it by existing. Sometimes the hat isn't from Shanks. Sometimes the fruit is framed more like a cursed artifact than a goofy power-up. Sometimes he can literally use a gun. But the core template is locked in. Rubber body, simple dream, absolute refusal to bend to authority. The Nika and Joy Boy stuff isn't there yet, but the "this guy breaks the world's mood" idea is already doing laps. Here's an interesting thing. That prototype personality already smells like Sun Wukong and classic trickster gods. We talked about it earlier, but look at the pattern again. Monkey kid from the east. Laughs at heaven's rules. Beats monsters and tyrants, then wanders off like it was just Tuesday. Oda basically took the Chaos Agent who wrecks the Jade Palace and said, what if he was a pirate captain instead of a stone monkey? The pirate code is new. The myth skeleton is old. And Oda doesn't suddenly slam on the brakes one day and go, surprise, he's a god now. He does the opposite. He layers the god around a guy who already works. Joy Boy gets mentioned late. Nika is a campfire story. Sun symbols, drums, The whole liberation vocabulary, all of that gets wrapped around a Luffy who is, functionally, the same dude from Chapter 1 punching a Sea King. The world reinterprets him. He doesn't rewrite himself to match a lore twist. That's why Gear 5 doesn't feel like a retcon if you've been paying attention. Of course, the rubber man whose body ignores common sense ends up with a fruit that literally weaponizes imagination. Of course, the guy who's been laughing through trauma turns out to be powered by joy. I want to emphasize, the reveal is shocking for the characters, not for the character. And to be fair, this is where Oda's meta-comments come in. He keeps saying he's known the ending forever.
People hear that and go, "Oh, so Luffy was always a chosen one." To which I say, kind of, but not in the boring prophecy way. Luffy isn't a golden ticket. He's a perfectly misfit key for a lock Oda has been filing down for 25+ years. The Void Century, the Ancient Kingdom, the sun motifs, the drums, even those dark universe futures we talked about. They're all different locks that only this specific brand of stupidity can open without breaking. So now that we've traced him from prototype punk to sun god captain, the question shifts. We know what Luffy is. What do we, as readers, actually do with that? How do you engage with a story that's basically daring you to live dumber and freer? That's where we're headed next. Away from the page and straight into what you choose to shout back at this series. Why Luffy works. The secret sauce behind a 25+ year protagonist. So let's talk about why this one rubber idiot has carried a global bestseller on his back for over 25 years without needing a character reboot, a grimdark phase, or a haircut. On paper, Luffy is so simple you could summarize him on a sticky note. Wants freedom, loves meat, punches bad guys. That should get old by Alabasta. It doesn't. Because as far as protagonist design goes, Luffy is a paradox. Extremely simple in description, extremely complex in effect. Here's an interesting thing. Early Romance Dawn drafts already nailed that. He's still a smiling kid pirate, but Oda keeps tweaking the surrounding details. The gun, the devil fruit, the hat's origin. While Luffy himself stays this stubborn core of, I do what I want, but I'm not a jerk about it. That's the trick. He's open enough that you can project onto him your anger, your dreams, your frustration with your own world, without him ever feeling like a vague, empty self-insert. We don't become Luffy. We test ourselves against him. I want to emphasize the 3-layer model, because it's the secret sauce. Layer 1. Gag character. Rubber clown. The guy who gets stuck in a wall, forgets names, and treats a Yonko like a raid boss in a mobile game. Oda foregrounds this in low-stakes scenes so we relax. Layer 2. Emotional core. The kid who rings the bell in Skypiea for a dead friend's promise. The captain who screams himself hoarse at Marineford. That's where loyalty and rage at injustice live. Layer 3. Mythic symbol. Sun god, Nika, Joy Boy. The guy whose heartbeat is literally the drums of liberation. Oda rotates which layer is on top, depending on the arc. Dressrosa foregrounds emotional core. Wano leans hard into mythic symbol, and then Egghead snaps back to gag Luffy eating in the middle of a crisis. People say, "Isn't that inconsistent?" To which I say, "Mate, you are a walking tonal mess, and somehow you expect this teenager made of rubber to be cleaner than your search history." Luffy is actually hyper-consistent at the value level.
He will pick the selfish, fun, reckless option that also happens to defend someone else's freedom. Every time. That consistency is the anchor, while the power system, the world, and the stakes spiral into insanity. Gear 2, Gear 5, reality-bending cartoon physics, ancient weapons, void century lore. Any other series would fly apart. It doesn't, because the stable variable is Luffy sees a cage and breaks it. And to be fair, that's the emotional hit. Luffy gives you permission to be selfish and kind at the same time, to say, "I want this," and also, "You're coming with me, whether you believe in yourself or not." How many of us were told to shrink, to be realistic, to stop causing trouble? We started with that idiot in the straw hat staring at the sea, right? Tiny boat, too big grin, microscopic brain cell count, just pointing himself at a horizon that has no idea what's coming. And now, somehow, that same silhouette is being framed as a sun god, a joy boy, a literal world historical event. One kid who used to get dunked in a barrel is now the drumbeat that's supposed to shake an entire age. Here's an interesting thing. If you line up every version of Luffy we've talked about, it looks like a flip book. Early Romance Dawn prototypes with guns and cursed artifacts instead of rubber. The simple "my body stretches" era. The rubber biology deep dives, where SBS answers quietly explain why Lightning just kind of gives up on him. The Nika reveal that turns that goofy power into mythic infrastructure. It's the same drawing, traced and retraced, getting bolder each time. Across 3 hours, we basically dissected that tracing process. We went from drafts and scrapped ideas to a full-blown folklore chimera, part Sun Wukong, part classic shonen hero, part whispered joy boy prophecy. Slotted into this Shanks-Roger joy boy relay race of inherited will. We poked at the rubber system, the weird immunity quirks, the gears that look like body horror played as slapstick. We dug into hidden relationships, cover story cameos,
Livre card notes, where some random side character's life quietly bent because this guy sailed through once and refused to apologize for existing. And, to be fair, the meta is fun. The sun motifs, the drums of liberation, Oda hinting that the final scene was locked in from early on. People online love to build this massive conspiracy board where every panel is a prophecy, to which I say, that's cool, but you're kind of missing the dumbest, most important part. Under every layer, myth, power-up, destiny, this is still a guy whose dream is, I want my friends to be free enough to chase their own stupid dreams, even if they make no economic sense. Because, as far as treasures go, that might actually be the real one. Not the gold, not the poneglyph answers, but the fact that wherever Luffy passes through, people end up slightly more unhinged and slightly more honest about what they want. A cook leaves a floating torture restaurant. A reindeer monster calls himself a doctor. A child weapon chooses to be a kid. So here's the lens I want to emphasize you carry into every future chapter and every reread. Whenever Luffy laughs, ask yourself, who just got a little freer because of it? When the drums start up, whose chains are rattling off-screen? When he does something unbelievably stupid, what system just quietly cracked? If you stuck with us through 3 hours of this lore mess, thank you. If you want more deep dives into the weird machinery behind One Piece, like, subscribe, throw this at a friend who still thinks Luffy is just the goofy rubber guy, and tell us what you want unraveled next. We'll be here, staring at the same horizon. See you at the next adventure.